Welcome, fiends of the night. Tonight, we journey into the heart of Texas, where long stretches of asphalt hide secrets darker than midnight. From phantom headlights on quiet county lanes to whispers that drift across empty bridges, these are the 20 most haunted roads in the Lone Star State. Each tale you're about to hear is carved from real encounters, recorded by those brave or foolish enough to drive into the unknown. But before we plunge into the darkness, one warning. Most viewers make a deadly mistake. They watch, and then they leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Smash that subscribe button now, or you might miss the next spine-tingling story lurking just beyond the screen dot. So tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Drop your location and local hour in the comments. Here on Creepy Vibes, the night has only just begun, and the horror is far from over. Now, buckle up. The road ahead is darker than you could ever imagine. The night air on Ranch to Market Road 619 smells of damp pine needles and gasoline, a heady mixture that clings to your throat the moment you roll down the window. The moon sits low and half full, its pale light slicing through ancient junipers that lean across the asphalt like curious onlookers. I'd been driving the stretch for years-long shifts hauling livestock from Leakey to camp. Wood, but nothing prepared me for the hush that descended just past the old cattle guard at mile marker 32. The gauge on the dashboard flickered, and the engine's low hum seemed to flatten, as if the forest itself had leaned in close to listen. I was barely halfway when I first saw her. She appeared in my passenger side mirror, gliding beside the truck like a wraith freshly risen from the earth. Her gown was white but dulled by dirt and sweat, clinging to a frame so delicate I thought she might dissolve if I blinked. Her hair hung in greasy strands, and her skin was the color of unripe fruit gray-green, stretched tight over cheekbones sharper than a hawk's. But it was her eyes that seared into me most of all. Empty hollows, a twin pair of black wells that swallowed light and left only shadow behind. I slammed the brakes, sending a roar through the tires and a plume of dust into the pines. The truck skidded, the headlights dancing across twisted trunks and low-hanging branches. My heart slammed against my ribs like a frantic animal. She stayed beside me, drifting without a sound, her gaze locked onto the mirror. Then, as if curiosity died in her chest, she turned and slipped back into the gathering dark. I eased forward, hands shaking on the wheel, telling myself it was a hitchhiker or a prank, maybe a local kid in costume. The road unfurled before me, empty except for the soft glow of the dashboard and the promise of civilization in Camp Wood 20 miles ahead. But every mile felt heavier, as though the asphalt carried the weight of 1,000 breathless secrets. My phone lay silent on the seat. No signal, of course, and I could almost hear the engine's pulse in my ears. That's when I noticed the scratch on the door, a single, jagged line gouged into the metal, fresh enough that rust had yet to seep in. My mind raced. I had just checked the truck at the station. No dents, no scuffs, nothing. Whoever or whatever tapped on my window must have wielded nails sharper than any road-salted tree limb. My thoughts circled back to her eyes. I told myself they were empty, but deep inside I felt something watching, something ancient and relentless. I flicked the switch to high beams, sweeping the roadside for movement. No silhouettes, no drifting gown, just the long-ribbed shadows of pine and cypress. A mile later, I passed the old Himes place, a crumbling farmhouse half devoured by kudzu and memory. Folks around here said a young bride once vanished there on her wedding night, crossing the threshold to meet her groom for the first time and slipping through some crack between worlds, never to return. Her fiancé searched the hills for years, shouting her name into the wind until his voice cracked and the neighbors heard only horse laughter drifting in reply. After that, The house sat empty, and the road grew quieter, as if that spot held its breath. I've never believed in ghosts, at least. I never admitted it aloud, but on that stretch I felt the ground tremble beneath my tires, as though unseen. Cattle stampeded through invisible pastures. The temperature dropped, my breath fogging the glass. My hands went numb, and the gauge needle inched toward empty. I'd filled up and leaky. There was no way I'd already burned through half a tank. Then, she stood in the middle of the road. Not to the side, where hitchhikers belong, but dead center, her head tilted, watching me. I slammed the brakes again, hard thudding in my throat. The tires hissed. I swore I saw the metal under her feet sizzle like wet paper. My vision swam, and for a single heartbeat, I thought the truck would roll backward into the forest, but it spat to a reluctant stop mere feet from her. I raised my hand as if to wave her off. She raised hers in return, slender fingers curved like claws. No nails, just skin pulled so tight you could see the sinews twitch. Then, without warning, she lunged not with the graceless leaping of the living, but with a deliberate slide of a shadow slipping from one wall to another. I yanked the wheel, tires chattering, and barreled around her at 20 miles an hour. Headlights locked on the black pines ahead. Behind me, I heard a soft thud. I dared not look, though I felt the thump echo through the cab. I floored the accelerator, the tachometer spiking, every warning light blinking like drowning eyes. For the next 10 miles I prayed that road would curve away to safety, but the houses thinned, taillights vanished, and only the forest remained. Eventually, the haze of adrenaline subsided. The tank light winked on, mocking me with its steady glow. I coasted into Camp Wood at dawn, engines scraping over the ramp, cafe lights flickering to life. I never saw the pale woman again, but when I stepped out, my boots pressed into the dirt. I felt her absence like a tooth left empty. I left the scratch on the door, a memento of that impossible night. Mechanics shook their heads and buffed out. Everything else. They couldn't explain the gouge any more than they could understand the bruise I carried in my chest, an ache that whispers at midnight, and makes me wonder how many more souls drift unseen along the pines, waiting for headlights to carve their shape into the dark. I remember the first time I passed that stretch of ranch to Market Road 32. It was late summer, the sky stained pink by the dying sun, and the pines on either side of the pavement were already dark silhouettes, as though someone had spilled ink against the sky. I was driving my old Ford pickup, windows down, the smell of hot asphalt and pine resin heavy in the air. Up ahead, the narrow road curved into a gloaming tunnel of trees so thick, so suffocating, that even the headlights seemed to hesitate before cutting through. It was then that I heard it. Bright, high-pitched laughter, like a child playing in the woods. Except I was alone out there. I slammed on the brakes, dust pouring off the gravel shoulders, and peered into the darkness beyond. The beams. My heart hammered in my chest, instinct or foolishness. I couldn't say which, but I reached out and killed the headlights. Then there was nothing but night and that laughter, echoing, rippling through the pines, pulling me toward its source. I fumbled for my phone, though I knew full well there was no service, and flicked it on. The screen cast a sickly blue across the dashboard, and that's when I saw it. A small pale hand pressed against the driver's side window, tapping the glass softly. My breath caught in my throat. I jerked backward, fumbling for the door lock. The laughter cut off instantly, and the air went dead silent. I dared a peek. Nothing. No little girl with braided hair. No crumpled dress at the wood's edge, only the wavering reflection of my own panicked eyes. I hammered the lock, threw the truck into reverse, and roared back onto the highway, the engine's roar drowning out my own quickening pulse. That night, I slept fitfully, the image of that hand haunting me. Who or what was tapping on my window? Over the next few days, I told myself it was a prank, that rattling branches had sounded like laughter, that my mind had played tricks on me in the dwindling light. But then came the missing children. They'd vanished from summer camps near Leakey, last seen headed toward the road for some errand or adventure. I watched the local news bulletins with dread, their search parties combing the forest in search of tiny footprints. I couldn't shake the sense that those footprints would lead not somewhere, but nowhere. A week later, I found myself back on that same road, rubbernecking through my dusty windshield. Something compelled me forward, guilt, curiosity, or that same inexorable pull of the woods at twilight. This time I slowed to a crawl as the pines arched overhead. Even though I was certain no child lurked behind those trees, I felt it before I heard it. The peals of laughter, ghostly, rippling. My pulse thundered so loud I thought it might burst out of my chest. I parked the truck halfway in the lane, hazard. Lights flickering. The dusk had darkened to a bruised purple, and the forest seemed to breathe around me. I stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, and peered into the gloom. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaking. No answer, just a sudden breeze, too cold for July, whispering through the needles overhead. Then it came, a soft tap against the windshield. I whipped around, hands clenching the truck's roof, eyes wide. There on the glass were 2 tiny handprints, streaked with crimson. My chest clenched in terror. I wiped at them with the sleeve of my shirt. They vanished, gone as though they'd never been there. But behind me, I heard it again, childlike giggles skittering through the trees, drawing me closer. I stumbled back into the cab and locked the doors, slamming the truck into gear. As I tore away, I spotted her, a pale specter at the road's edge. A little girl in a faded dress, face turned toward me, hollow eyes reflecting my headlights. She raised one hand slowly, beckoning me to stop. I floored the accelerator, but even as I sped down that stretch of highway, I felt a chill settle in my bones. That night, the dreams began. I saw the girl pressed against the back window of a car I couldn't recognize, her fingers turning the glass red from the inside. I heard her laughter in the walls of my house, the echo of tiny footsteps in my empty hallways. And always, at the edge of my vision, I sensed something following me, dark shapes woven between the pines. When I woke the next morning, I saw it on my front door. Tiny handprints pressed into the wood, stained faintly with blood. I wanted to believe someone had smeared paint or ketchup as a prank. Some part of me knew the truth, though. That child was real, in the worst way. There would be no stopping this, no simple exorcism of a prankster's glee. Over the weeks that followed, more children vanished. A boy riding his bike home from the creek. A sister and brother chasing a lost kite into the woods. Each time, neighbors reported laughter at dusk, pale shapes glimpsed between the trees. Search parties found nothing but broken toys scattered. Amid pine needles dolls without heads, a tricycle missing a wheel. The forest seemed to breathe with a malignant hunger. I sold the pickup, moved out of town, and changed my number. I left behind my home, my job, everything tethered to that cursed stretch of asphalt. But I never truly escaped. At night, I still hear laughter drifting on the wind, faint as a memory but as sharp as a blade. I see the after-image of that little girl's face in every glass I pass, every mirror I glimpse. Sometimes I think I'm safe in my new life, far from the hill country's pines. But then I realize you don't outrun whatever lives in those woods. You carry it inside you, a heartbeat, drowned in laughter. And one day, when you least expect it, perhaps at dusk, when your headlights fade into nothing, you'll hear it again. That child's laughter, bright and cruel, beckoning you to stop. And if you do, you'll feel the tap of a small hand on Femfalsond and Anzingju. You'll feel the tap of a small hand on Vinzingju. Your window, warm and insistent, demanding to be let in, because no living child ever appears. But she's there, and she's watching, and one day she'd choose you. I'd been running on empty for miles, gaslight blinking like a warning beacon in the dark. Old Lampasas Road stretched ahead, a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt weaving between cedar brakes and mesquite thickets under a sky so black it felt alive, pressing down on my shoulders. The night air tasted of dust and sagebrush, and every time I eased off the accelerator I heard the engine's tremor, as if my old Ford F-150 was begging for mercy. I should have turned back hours ago, but something about this stretch of highway always drew me on an itch beneath the skin that whispered old secrets and restless memories. My headlights sliced a tunnel of pale light through the darkness, illuminating nothing but road. Then, 15 miles out of Johnson City, I saw them. Headlights, 4 of them, bright and steady, rimming the road behind me. Too close to be another car at that dead hour. My heart picked up, pounding against my ribs like a hammer. I pressed harder on the gas, feeling my knuckles blanch on the steering wheel. Every bump compelled me to glance in the mirror, but every time I did, those lights glowed nearer, breathing down my tailgate. A cold sweat broke along my spine when I realized they matched my speed exactly. I slowed. They sped. It wasn't a truck, not a car. It was something older, something mechanical, but without the hiss of an engine. My headlights caught a shape through the rear window. High wheels, spokes too fine, and a low, ancient body that gleamed black as obsidian even under my own beams. A funeral coach. A hearse, but not like any I'd ever seen. It rode low, drawn by horses that clipped the earth like skeletons bound in sinew, hooves clanking bone against asphalt. Their skulls were visible beneath tattered flaps of flesh, eyeless sockets burning phosphorescent blue. The horses' harnesses rattled like chains in a crypt, and where there should have been reins, nothing but drifting shadows clasped to the coach's polished driver's bench. I jerked the wheel, turning onto a gravel side road that cut across a dry creek bed. The horses answered with speed, wind from their motion rattling my mirrors. My heart threatened to leap from my throat as the gravel kicked up behind me in a dusty plume, the hoofbeats echoing like drums of war. The moon crept out from behind a wisp of cloud, and I saw the coach's window-stained glass swirls depicting pale angels weeping in moonlight. But behind those windows nothing moved, no living passenger, no driver, just those empty horses drawing death toward me, relentless and silent. I stomped the accelerator and the truck roared, climbing a shallow hill. In the rearview mirror, the headlights bobbed over that rise. Then the hill crested. The coach vanished. My heart pounded so hard I could taste it in my mouth. I hit the brakes. Engine quit cold. Darkness swallowed me. Total. I sat gripping the wheel, breath-catching, waiting. Wind whispered through the open window. No hoofbeats, no engines. Only my own ragged pulse. I let it tremble briefly. Then reached down, turned the key. Nothing. I tried again. Nothing. The phone had no signal this far out. Panic burned at the edges of my mind. I slammed the door and stepped onto gravel, searching for a cell signal, for any sign of life. Above, the sky swirled with stars that seemed to wink at me. Nothing moved in the brush. No distant lights. Silence. Thick and smothering. And then a flicker, gleaming reflections far behind me. I turned. There, far down the road, headlights winked on, then off, then flared again, advancing. The horses emerged riding the dark, spectral, and terrible harness, clipping like rattling bones. I ran back to the truck, slammed inside, and locked the doors. The coach slowed, pulling even with my driver's window. I saw the horses' skulls looming in the glass, teeth exposed in a grinning mockery. My reflection flickered over there. Empty eyes. They paused, standing still as if listening, nostrils flaring in frozen gusts. Then a soft, hollow voice drifted through the glass. It sounded like a chapel bell tolling underwater. A summons. Something deep in me shivered awake. The knowledge that beyond those horses lay the forgotten dead, exiled to drift forever in limbo between grave and road. I remembered old tales, that travelers who encountered the phantom coach would be carried off to unmarked graves, their souls traded for an empty seat in that silent carriage. I fumbled the switch for the headlights. They blinked on and off. My breath came in gasps. I slammed the key with my palm. Engine thundered to life. Slowly, I backed up. The coach backed, horses scraping backward, still yoked to death's vessel. I slammed the truck into drive and lurched forward, swallowing gravel, heart hammering like war drums. The coach followed, creeping behind me, lights waning, as if reluctant to give chase. Then I turned the wheel hard onto Lampasas Road again, tires shrieking protest. My headlights caught movement at the edge of the road crosses hammered into the earth, weathered planks marking graves of those whose names were long forgotten. My stomach dropped. The crosses whispered warnings. Turn back, it's too late. But I couldn't. I punched the gas pedal and the truck leapt forward, passing the open grave where one cross lay face down in dust. The coach's lights appeared again behind me, low and hateful. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. At the wheel, time slowed. I saw the shapes of the skeletal horses, sinew stretched over bones, eyes glowing lantern cold, hooves striking sparks from the asphalt. We raced side by side, me desperately clinging to the steering wheel, Death's carriage pacing my battered old Ford. I yelled, a sound swallowed by the night. Then I saw it a curve in the road ahead, sharp, with a creak at the base of the bend. I remembered an old concrete bridge, its rail crumbled, narrow. I veered for it, heart shredding. The truck fishtailed. Gravel sprayed. The coach followed, but as we hit the bridge it faltered, horses slipping, harness chains snapping. Their skeletons lurched, and in that instant I saw faces beneath the muscled remains' eyes sewn shut, mouths open in silent screams. Then the coach lurched forward alone, horses collapsing through missing planks, falling into dark water below with a splash that echoed like 1,000 souls sinking. I didn't stop to see if they floated. I hammered the gas, wheels spinning off the bridge. The truck soared across the creek bank, tires regaining purchase on the road past the bend. I didn't look back. I drove straight into Johnson City as dawn cracked the sky, orange and pale. My knees shook so badly I could barely shift gear. I parked under a street lamp, chest heaving, and sat in the silent cab until the world spun righted itself. When I finally stepped out, the truck lights were off, engine cold again. In the east, the sun rose, and for a moment I thought I saw hoof prints. In the gravel at my rear wheels, tiny impressions of death's horse hooves leading backward into the darkness. I closed the door, locked it, and walked toward town without looking over my shoulder, knowing I'd never set foot on old Lampasas. Road again. A low beam wavered through the mist, painting the road in trembling strokes of gray and black. The headlights cut through the fog like knives, but the air swallowed their warmth, leaving only a chill that crawled beneath your skin. Every mile. Marker passed without a whisper. The world beyond those dim beams felt too vast, too empty to cradle a living soul. Somewhere up ahead, a battered sign leaned at the roadside, its letters worn away by time and rain, but you could still make out the faint silhouette of two words, Silverton Crossing. The sign swung back and forth on rusted hinges, though the night was as still as death. You didn't remember seeing Silverton Crossing on any map. You'd driven this stretch of FM 148 countless times on late runs from Dallas to Tyler, and you were certain you'd never pass through a town with that name. Your hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles turning white in the dim glow of the dashboard. The engine idled with a soft growl, as if reluctant to move. You tapped the brakes, half expecting the tires to bite into gravel, but they hummed on smooth asphalt. A low rumble echoed beneath the road, and the steering wheel vibrated in your grip. You sat frozen, heart thrumming in your throat, feeling that same pull you'd heard about in whispered legends, a hollow tug beneath the wheels, like something too hungry to be denied. When you glanced in the rearview mirror, your breath caught. The fog pressed against the glass, thick and suffocating, but within its gauzy swirl you saw headlights, two orbs, amber and low, following at a steady distance. You flicked your eyes back to the road, but there was no curve, no rise in the asphalt that would account for another vehicle. A sliver of doubt told you it was your own lights playing tricks, but your gut screamed otherwise. You eased back on the accelerator, and the phantom headlights slowed too, matching your pace as though tethered to your speedometer. Ahead, the road dipped into a shallow valley, the land on either side bald and rolling, dotted only with skeletal oaks that leaned inward like mourners. The mist curled around their trunks, and in the halo of your lights they looked like twisted figures draped in white. You remembered the stories. Back in the 30s, a logging camp had existed around Cedar Creek Lake, a bustling place until the Great Depression dried up work and hope both. Some said the camp burned down in a fire too fierce to fight, and the bodies beneath the ash refused to move on. Others whispered that the lake's depths hid something older, a sunken town from before settlers arrived, a place that awoke whenever a traveler dared to intrude. You pressed on, but the pull grew stronger. The hum under the road turned to a keening wail, faint but unmistakable, like the whimper of too many children crying in the dark. You felt it through the frame of your truck, tickling your teeth and vibrating your ribs. Your pulse pounded in your ears, louder than any engine note. With a sudden surge of resolve, you stomped the gas pedal, determined to outrun the unease. The phantom headlights lunged closer, but the fog swallowed them whole, and when you flicked the brights, there was only empty gray ahead. Then it happened. The asphalt cracked. You saw it first as a hairline fracture beneath your right headlight, spreading outward in jagged lines. Your seat jolted with an abrupt thud, and the windshield shuddered. You slammed on the brakes, and the tires grated against the pavement. Like bone on bone, the engine stuttered, coughed, and died. Darkness rolled across the cabin in an instant, heavier than the night outside. You fumbled for the key, but the ignition clicked empty. The hum beneath the road faded into silence, leaving only the relentless throb of your own heart. Your breath came in visible puffs now, each exhale freezing in the cab. You risked a glance through the side window. The sign at the roadside had stopped swinging. It hung dead still, as though painted in place. Its faded letters blinked at you through the mist, urging you to stop. You tried the radio. Static answered, crackling like distant laughter. There was no guarantee of cell signal out here, but you clicked through the presets anyway, desperate for some sign of life. Nothing. A soft scrape reached your ear, like fingernails on metal, and you tensed so. Acutely your teeth ground together. The passenger side door handle rattled. You spun, sweat prickling your neck despite the cold. The handle clicked, the latch dropping with a quiet thud. The fog outside thickened, pressing the glass inward as if it had weight. You yanked the door. Lock no, it was jammed, moving only a hair's breadth before freezing solid. You pounded the dash and panicked out. The scrape returned, louder this time, accompanied by a muffled metallic groan. Whatever was outside leaned into the door, its weight bending the frame. You heard it draw breath, a slow, dragging inhalation that rattled the window. You dared not look. With shaking fingers, you fumbled for your phone, but the screen wouldn't light, no matter how many times you pressed the button. You sank lower in your seat, trying to make yourself as small as possible. Then, improbably, the engine roared back to life, startling you so badly you nearly leapt out of your skin. The headlights flared, illuminating the fog in stark white beams. The radiator hissed as you hit the ignition again. The dash lights flickered. You snatched the wheel, twisted the key until the engine caught. You backed up, swearing at the locked rear window that refused to open. You revved forward, tires spinning. On the cracked pavement, the world outside blurred, the sign rushing past in a haze of silver and rust. You slammed on the brakes, calmed, then gunned it in reverse until the wheels bit the shoulder, kicking spray of gravel behind you. Once you cleared the hollow tug, beneath the road, the engine fell silent again, as though granted permission. You coasted forward, the tires finding grip on solid asphalt. In the mirror, you watched as the sign receded, then vanished altogether, swallowed by the fog. The valley's oaks stood like silent sentinels, their branches motionless in the windless air. The road straightened out, smooth and unmarked, leading back to the world you knew. When you finally reached a patch of clear sky, free from mist and fast memory, dawn's pale light was just breaking along the horizon. You drove the remaining miles to the nearest town without turning back. The diner's neon sign buzzed welcome as you parked, and you burst out of the truck, gasping the cold air as though it might cleanse you. The waitress found you shivering, hands still white around your coffee cup, eyes wild in your skull. You wanted to tell her everything, but the words lodged in your throat. Later, when the sun burned off the last of the fog, you returned with a local deputy to search for the sign. There was no sign of a sign, no rusted post, no battered board, not even disturbed grass where it might have stood. The asphalt showed no cracks or fractures. The road was as smooth as any highway should be. The deputy told you the area was part of a private ranch now, long since reclaimed, and that no town had ever existed along that stretch. You left empty-handed. But some nights, when highway eyes the world with polished headlights and steel resolve, you feel that pull again, distant, insistent. You know it waits somewhere beneath the road, in the space between mile markers, where fog gathers like breath and old things stir in the dark. And you remember Silverton Crossing, its sign swinging, in the windless night, beckoning you to stop. Because once you answer the call, there's no turning back. I remember when the lights first began to wink out. I'd been driving north on Loop 337 just after midnight, my headlights slicing through the humid Texas air as a lullaby of cicadas buzzed in the pines beyond the shoulder. The speedometer hovered at 70, and the road ahead was empty, just the two lanes curving gently around suburban sprawl, giving way to fields of tall grass. I'd grown complacent on drives like this, lulled by the regular click of my windshield wipers on the summer humidity film, thinking the world felt safe at that hour. I was wrong. The first street lamp beside the road sputtered, its orange glow throwing my dashboard into jittery relief before it died, plunging that stretch of pavement into flat darkness. I tapped my brakes, and the wheel wobbled in my grip. But it wasn't a pothole. A second lamp blinked off, and a third. My pulse drummed in my ears as I realized the entire line of lamps was going dead, one by one, like a string of candles snuffed by an unseen wind. The world behind me slipped into blackness too, swallowed by the night except for the dull reflection of my high beams. I eased my foot off the gas, but a curious force seemed to pull me forward, an electric undertow in the empty road. Then I saw it, a carriage, drifting across all four lanes ahead of me, rimed in moonlight but veiled in shadow. It hung in the dark like a promise of dread, drawn by horses whose hooves made no sound. The carriage body was low-slung and ornate, a funeral coach, black and polished, with windows framed in wrought iron scrollwork. Thin, gauzy veils obscured the glass, but behind them I could make out robed figures bent in eternal mourning. A row of them sat stiff-backed and silent, shoulders bowed as if bearing the weight of countless sorrows. I hit the brakes, tires screeching as I skidded to a stop 50 feet away. My engine revved loudly in protest, then coughed to a halt. The clock on my dash glowed 12:03. I killed the engine and sat frozen, heart pounding, hands shivering on the wheel. The lamp stayed off. I was bathed in the bleak spill of my headlights, and nothing else. The horse's eyes glowed faintly pale pinpricks that floated over the lines of asphalt. Time stretched. 1 minute, 2. Then without warning, the horses moved. The carriage slid toward me, gliding without hoof beat, crossing the yellow line as if it were water. They passed by with a faint musical sigh, like rustling silk, no more than 4 feet. Away. I watched and felt the heat of their passing, a cold that sank to bone. The mourners inside didn't look at me. They stared straight ahead, their veils quivering in some silent breath of wind. One of them lifted a skeletal hand, slender fingers curling around the edge of the glass. Underneath the gauze I glimpsed a face so hollow it might have been carved from old driftwood. I tried to cry out, but my throat had bled its voice. Then they'd gone, and the lamps flickered back to life in sequence, first the one nearest me, then the next, until the whole line glowed again, dipping the roadside in. That tired amber. The carriage was gone. The only trace was a faint slither of dust in the air, as though they'd passed through another dimension and left nothing but a sigh of mortar and stone. I forced my legs to work. Out of the car, knees trembling, I walked forward into the ditch grass to where they'd been. The ground was undisturbed, no hoof prints, no wheel marks. A hand's width of crushed grass, flattened like a footprint left by something that weighed no weight. I knelt, reached out, and felt a shudder trickle through my fingertips. Then I realized I'd left the engine running. I spun around and nearly vomited. The carriage sat behind me in my own lane, horses' heads cocked as if they'd been expecting me all along. My headlights fell on the ironwork and the veils, and I could see those mourners had shifted positions. One lifted a veiled face to look straight at me, and I felt her gaze press through the glass and wrap around my chest. I ran like claws had torn my spine, and I could only escape by moving. I fell into the passenger door, slammed it, and jammed the car back into drive. Tires kicked up gravel as I tore down the road, the sight of that carriage lasting in my rearview mirror until it slipped behind the curve. The lamps flared, swallowing that patch of darkness, but it lacked the hush that had accompanied the carriage. The crickets sang again. The hum of air conditioning breathed life back into the passenger cabin. But I knew the world was changed. I didn't stop until I reached the 24-hour diner off IH-35, neon buzzing over Formica. I stumbled out, hands on the hood, eyes wide. When I turned back, there was no trace of the carriage, no sign of any procession. The parking lot was empty except for a single white pickup. Inside, a man in a black suit stood at the counter, sipping coffee, watching me. His face was pale and motionless, and he tipped his head once, as if in greeting, then set down his cup and walked out the door. I blinked, and he was gone. They say after midnight the dead have leave to walk, drawn by unfinished business. I don't know what business those mourners carry in that veiled coach, but I feel it's tied to me now. I dream of their barreled wheels rolling over blacktop, of their hush and their hollow stares. I hear hoofbeats in the wind when the power flickers. Last night, a street lamp blinked off in my own neighborhood, and it felt like sinew uncoiling. In the dark, I grabbed my keys and ran outside. but there was nothing but night and the sound of cicadas. I don't drive Loop 337 anymore. I avoid roads with dead streetlights. But summer storms and wiry overpasses conspire against me sometimes. Lightning throws shapes across the pavement that stay even after the flash. Sometimes I catch in my mirror the dark shape of a carriage drifting in behind, its wheels unmoving, its lamps unlit. I look away. I focus on the hum of traffic, but I can't unsee it. The morning coach rides still, and I think it's waiting. For an invitation, I just have to stop, roll my window down, and it will slip in beside me, its hollow passengers beckoning me to share their shade. And I fear that next time, I won't have the strength to turn the key and drive away. The highway stretched ahead like a wound-up spring, taut and endless beneath the failing glow of your headlights. Night pressed in so close you could almost feel the damp breath of the brush tunnel brushing against your driver's side window, leaning in with the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. You'd heard about this stretch of US 83 before, stories whispered in truck stops and laid over. Diners about a lullaby that drifted out of nowhere, about drivers who swore they heard someone calling their name from the blackness behind them. You chalked it up to nerves, to highway hypnosis, to the sort of folktales that flared up around lonely roads. But tonight, you'd sworn you'd heard it too soft, slow, like a weary lullaby, carrying some impossible familiarity, as if it had known you since the day you were born. You jerked the wheel, eyes wild, scanning every dark bend and patch of mesquite that leaned sinisterly into the road, but seen nothing. Just the brush, ever watching. Just the hum of your tires rolling on worn asphalt. The radio crackled, flipping static to dead air, and you reached to twist the dial, but the lullaby rose again underneath the hiss, low and steady, a lullaby you didn't recognize but that threaded your spine with something like longing. You wanted to turn off the engine, step into the night and find the source, but the ache in your calves from hours behind the wheel made you hesitate. What if you found it? What if it found you? So instead you pressed your foot to the gas, letting your rig pick up speed, swallowing mile after mile of empty road, the brush fading behind you for a moment, then closing back in thick and writhing as if it were alive and had merely allowed you a reprieve. The lullaby wound tighter around you, like a noose, and you rolled down the window despite the clammy heat and let the night breeze tug at your hair. The tune wrote on it, clearer now, a slow, aching melody, a lullaby that had swayed someone something too. Sleep. You shut the window, but it didn't stop. It slithered through the cab as though the thin metal walls were nothing more than paper. Your heart hammered. You glanced in the passenger side mirror and thought you saw a shape reflected there, pale and oddly still, pressing forward through the brush, but when you blinked, it vanished. You told yourself you were seeing things, heat haze, exhaustion, a mind fraying at the edges, but your hands, slick on the wheel, betrayed you. There was sweat on your palms, though the air was cool, and your knuckles shone white. You had to shake it off. You reminded yourself that nowhere beyond that brush lay anything but tumbleweeds and mesquite, nothing that could sing to you or call your name. You slammed your hand on the horn, long and blaring, and the tune cut out in a whisper as though someone placed a finger against its lips. Then silence. Just the horn's echo rolling off the brush. You exhaled and reached for the radio again, but it clicked on before your fingers even grazed the dial, a station so faint you thought it was more static. Then the tuning settled on a low voice, distant but distinctly human. It spoke your name. First a whisper, then clear. Michael. Your birth name, the one your mother called you in her lullabies. The hairs along your scalp stood erect. You ripped at your collar, trying to tear the weight off your chest. You weren't Michael. You were not the little boy who used to peek from behind the curtains and dream of friendly ghosts. You were you, a man who drove a route too many nights, a man who believed in the hard facts of the world. Yet your mind screamed at you to believe it. Michael. The voice came again, softer now, as though the radio recognized your fear and leaned in to soothe you. You turned the dial to static, and the voice slid into the hiss, refusing to vanish. Your rig barreled into the center of the road as you swerved, headlights slicing through the brush in jagged arcs. The lullaby returned, more insistent, weaving around the engine's growl until it was impossible to tell one from the other. Your breath came in ragged gasps, heart attacking your ribcage, and you flicked on your brights, hoping to burn it back. You pressed your foot down until the tack swung red, trying to outrun the lullaby, trying to leave the brush tunnel for open sky. But the stretch of road never ended. The vanishing point ahead never shifted. The trees closed in, emotionless. Corridor of gray and black, as if you'd driven in a circle for hours and had not covered a single mile. A crack snapped through the gloom ahead, sharp as a gunshot. You lifted from the accelerator to glare into the night and saw it. A figure crouched atop a fallen limb that arched over the road, a child, dressed in tattered white, rocking back and forth, humming your lullaby. The child's face was hidden beneath a mop of dark hair, but when it lifted its head, you saw deep hollows where eyes should have been. Yet the child sang, a whisper in your skull, "Michael, won't you stay?" You hit the brakes, tires locked, sparks against the asphalt, and the child leapt from the branch, vanishing into the brush with a rustle of wind and bone. Your foot slammed on the accelerator to keep from sliding into the ditch, but the rig skidded sideways, fishtailing until you lurched to a stop, smoke rising beneath the tires. The lullaby swelled, not from without but from within. You heard it inside your ears, inside your skull, a pulse that matched your blood. And then your name, a scream that called you, soft and seductive. You twisted around in your seat, gloves still gripping the wheel, to see. Nothing. No child, no shape, just the unbroken darkness behind you. The tunnel of brush that pressed so close you felt the coarse fingers grazing your shoulder. A faint scrape sounded behind you, metal on metal, and you jolted forward, heart jackhammer. You flicked on your interior light, but it popped and died, leaving you in deeper black. The lullaby fell silent, as though it too waited to see what you would do next. Your breath was a rasp. You tried to swallow, but your throat felt full of cotton. You reached for the radio one last time, praying for a lifeline. The dial spun, stations bleeding into static, until you landed on one playing mournful church bells and breathless whispers. You pressed the button to crank it off, and it cut with a snap, but the voice remained. Just behind you, so close it felt like a breath against your neck. Michael, come back. You didn't hesitate. You tore the rig into gear, tires chattering, and slammed your foot into the floor, shooting forward like a shot from a cannon. The brush tumbled past in a blur, the lullaby rising again as you tore down the stretch, but you didn't slow. Not until the brush thinned, until the sky bled stars overhead, until the road opened out into flat, empty prairie. You didn't dare look back. You drove miles more at reckless speed, tears hot on your cheeks, until at last you found a highway. Patrol cruiser parked at a broken-down mile marker. You flung open the door and stumbled into the beam of the spotlight, shouting for help, voice raw and panicked. They found your rig idling in the middle of the road, engine still running, radio on static, headlights locked on the black tunnel of brush you had fled. The patrolman's flashlight swiped the inside of the cab, no sign of child, no sign of anything but your shaking hands on the wheel and your face bone white in the glare. He radioed it in and helped you back onto the roadway, offered to follow. You went for a report, you declined. You told him you just wanted to get home. You told him you'd heard a lullaby, you'd heard your name. He nodded, the veteran of too many spooked drivers. and let you drive off under the silent stars dot in the rearview mirror. As you sped away on the wide-open stretch, you thought you saw the brush tunnel, dark and waiting like a mouth that would never close. And just beyond it, in the broken edge of the night, a pale face, a child's face smiling at you, singing. Your name, Michael. And you kept driving, but you knew it would find you again, wherever you went, calling you. Back through the brush where the lullaby waited. The road had been silent for miles, the pines standing like dark sentinels on either side, their needles whispering secrets in the humid Texas night breeze. I'd been driving for hours, headlights cutting through the thick darkness, the digital. Clock on the dash blinking 2:30 a.m. in dull red numerals. State Highway 21 lay south of Bastrop, a stretch of asphalt notorious among locals for strange lights, sudden fog banks, and whispers of the past whispers I had dismissed until now. Rain earlier had slicked the surface, and I eased the rental truck across the moss-slick bridge, every creak of the wooden planks beneath my tires echoing in the hollow quiet. Then came the faint rumble, like old wagon wheels rolling on iron. Rims, though no wagon was in sight. My heart lurched. I slammed the brakes, the tires protesting as they sought traction. In the rearview mirror, the darkness seemed to thicken, the distant tree line shifting like a living thing. The rumble deepened, a mournful groan that vibrated through the chassis. I peered over my shoulder. Nothing but the endless ribbon of road, and beyond that the black mass of forest. But through the mist I swore I saw movement and outline, pale as moonlight, rolling forward with the rhythm of ghost steel wheels. I shivered, trying to convince myself it was my imagination playing tricks, the ache of fatigue twisting my perceptions. After all, who would cross this old bridge at this hour, especially in something so archaic? A damp wind rattled the windows, carrying a faint odor of dust and rot. I killed the engine and stepped out, the asphalt cold beneath my boots. Air clung to my skin in beads, the smell of pine resin and wet earth pressing in. For a moment, I thought I heard distant voices, pleading soft, urgent, as though trapped behind an unseen barrier. I strained to understand them. Help us, they seemed to whisper. Set us free. Gooseflesh rose on my arms. I swallowed, my throat dry, and lifted my flashlight. The beam cut a narrow path through the haze, landing on the far end of the bridge. Nothing. Only the black canvas of forest and the empty road. Stretching beyond dock, then the tailgate of the truck shivered, a hollow thud against metal. My breath stalled. I turned, raising the flashlight, its beam shaking. The back of the truck, where I'd thrown a duffel bag and a few boxes of road snacks, was sealed shut. And yet something pressed from within, a shadowy bulk that bulged against the steel like desperate limbs. My pulse pounded, fingers slick with sweat as I clicked the button to unlock the tailgate. The latch flipped open with a screech that echoed across the water. My light sliced into the bed. Empty. No boxes, no bags, nothing I had left. Only the bare, wet metal bed of the truck. I stumbled back, heart in my throat. Behind me came the wagon sound again. Closer this time, timber on timber, a lonesome creaking. Rhythm. The hairs at my nape lifted as I spun around. There, crossing the bridge behind me, hovered the pale outline of a carriage ancient, its wooden wheels ghostly and insubstantial, rims glowing faintly like embers in the dark. The carriage glided soundlessly over the wood, thick moss brushing, aside in unnatural arcs. Inside I could just make out shapes. Bundled forms, draped in tattered gray cloth, their faces hidden, their postures slumped in sorrow. I didn't have time to think. Instinct seized me and yanked me back into the cab. My hands shook as I slammed the door and fumbled for the keys. The engine roared to life, tires spinning as I floored the accelerator. The truck surged forward, the cab vibrating with every heartbeat. I raced off the bridge, the taillights of that phantom wagon lingering in my mirror like dying fireflies. For a moment they flickered, then vanished into the gloom, leaving only the bland glow of my own. Brake lights ahead. I didn't stop. The road curved and dipped, and I navigated it blind, eyes darting between the road and the mirror, fearing the spectral carriage would chase me into the trees. The world-blurred pine trunks whipping past, insects scraping the windshield, the engine's hum drowning out rational thought. I glanced at the speedometer, 75, 80. The speed limit was 45, but I didn't care. Somewhere ahead lay civilization, maybe a cluster of homes, a gas station, anything to prove. This was all a hallucination. My chest burned, adrenaline flooding my veins. Then the taillights appeared again, bright red pinpoints hovering behind me. Only this time they weren't my own. Two lights, level and steady, glowed like angry embers, keeping pace despite my efforts to outrace them. Behind those lights I thought I saw motion tendrils of mist trailing, as if the carriage was breathing. Terror pooled in my guts, forcing me to drop my speed, but the lights jerked forward, closing distance. I spun the wheel, tires screeching, sending the truck fishtailing across the highway. For a breathless second, I was sideways. The world tilted so gravity lost its claim. Then the wheels caught hold, and I righted the rig, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I reached the turnoff for Bastrop, the little cluster of lights promising refuge. I veered onto the frontage road, slamming through a dust cloud that suffocated the mirror view. When it cleared, the lights were gone. Only my own tail lamps glared meekly at me, the world outside my window still as black as oblivion. I drove. Through Bastrop at breakneck speed, past shuttered stores and empty streets, pausing only when I saw the neon glow of a 24-hour diner. I parked haphazardly, engine idling, and stumbled out, crashing through the door as the bell above jangled. A lone waitress looked up from her stool, her face pale. I need water," I managed, voice ragged. "Ice water." She slid a glass across without a word, and I seized it, gulping until the cold burned down my throat. Outside, the rain began again. Gentle taps on the diner roof, the rhythm oddly comforting. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, peering out at the road. The highway was deserted, black and infinite. No moss-slick bridge, no wooden planks. No phantom carriage. And yet the taste of their pleas lingered dusty, aching, impossible to wash away. I considered driving back, to prove it was all in my head, but fear seized me anew. What if on that bridge I had lifted a latch and invited something into the world that shouldn't be freed? The thought twisted like a knife. I finished the water, left a crumpled bill on the counter, and slipped back into the night, the truck, waiting with the engine still warm. I didn't look back at the diner, only slid in beside the wheel and turned the key dot as I merged onto Highway 21 once more. The rain thickening around the headlights, I understood that some roads remember you. They hold your scent, your fear, your fleeting joy, and they take it all, returning it to you in forms half-remembered and all too real. I drove on, the lights ahead promising nothing, the darkness around me alive with whispering pines. And somewhere, down that moss-slick bridge, wagon wheels creaked, and unseen bodies pressed against my tailgate, begging for release that I could never grant. The road stretched out before me like a pale ribbon, the heat of late afternoon shimmering in the asphalt, but there was a chill in the air I couldn't explain. FM 2023 wound through B County's scrubland, a ribbon of cracked pavement flanked by mesquite and mescalbian trees whose gnarled limbs clawed at the cerulean sky. I'd driven this road dozens of times on my way home from Oilfield, meetings and weekend fishing trips at Lake Corpus, but tonight it felt different. As though the highway itself had shifted beneath my tires. It began at dusk, just after the sun dipped behind the low hills and the first stars pricked the indigo curtain overhead. I rounded a gentle curve and froze. There, at the roadside, 12 pristine white wooden crosses stood anchored in the dry earth, each one no taller than a child's height, each bearing a single date, neatly painted in black. The 10th of July 2025, the 1st of September 2025, November 22nd, 2025. Dates that hadn't yet come to pass. My pulse hammered as I slowed to a crawl. The crosses were too new, their wood unweathered, their paint fresh, yet they were blanketed in a slick layer of dew from nowhere. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, another cross had appeared, its inscription reading the 5th of December 2025. I shook my head. Some jackass was playing a prank. But as I passed, the air around me felt heavier, as though the planes themselves had exhaled. My headlights cut sideways through the gloom, illuminating one after another of those crosses marching into the distance. I told myself to drive on, but the truck wanted to slow. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. A mile further, I found what looked to be a makeshift memorial. A beat-up folding chair leaned against. A cross dated August 14th, 2025. On the chair lay a single red rose, too vibrant against the wood's stark white. The petals glistened in the beam, perfect and unblemished, even though it was long past the season for fresh blooms here. I swallowed hard, the tufted prairie grass trembling at my feet, though no breeze stirred. I reached out as if compelled and brushed the rose. It felt icy, as though frost had settled on its petals. I jerked back. Then the whispers started. They were soft at first, like the rustle of grass, barely audible over the drone of my engine. Come here. Soon, I couldn't tell if the voice was male or female, child or adult. It seemed to slip in from every direction, as though the night itself had learned to speak. My heart raced. I flicked on the radio, nothing but static. I switched it off. The whispers remained, growing in urgency, cycling through fragments. You'll join us, before the date, under the crosses. Panic coiled in my gut. I knew I had to leave, slam on the gas and tear away. But my foot hovered over the pedal like it belonged to someone else, uncertain, unwilling. Then I saw her. She stood beyond the last cross, where the asphalt gave way to red dirt, a pale shape at the edge of my headlights. A girl, no more than 10, wearing a white dress that gleamed like fresh paint. Her dark hair was long and wet, plastered to her cheeks, though there was no rain. She raised a hand and pointed ahead, her eyes reflecting the light like twin lanterns. Tuned to my fear, my breath caught. I blinked and she was gone. The road continued, twisting toward a small overpass where FM 2023 bridged a dry creek bed. There, the crosses ended abruptly, but in their place lay footprints, dozens of them, human prints pressed deep into the clay. They started at the highway shoulder and fanned out into the creek bed, then vanished. The moon had climbed higher, now pale and watchful. I shone my beam across the prints and felt the blood drain from my face. The tracks were fresh. Too fresh. I slammed the truck into reverse, tires spinning in loose gravel, but the engine roared and surged forward instead. As though fed by some unseen will, the truck lurched ahead. I screamed, pounded the dash, tried the brake again. Nothing. The windscreen blurred with tears I hadn't realized I'd shed. Then, as I crossed the overpass, the engine cut dead. The headlights died. I was swallowed in darkness punctuated only by the moon. Silence pressed in, broken by a slow drumming. Footsteps on metal. Behind me, the traction control light flickered, then sputtered out. My heart in my throat, I dared not look back. The steps came closer, measured, deliberate. The whispering returned, clearer now. Today is July 2nd, 2025. I realized in horror that the first cross had borne the date July 10th, 8 days from now. Then another voice, younger, more urgent. Get out. Before, I wanted to obey, to fling open the door and dive into the creek bed, but my muscles refused. The footsteps were at the tailgate now, slow but steady. Another step, then a metallic clang and unseen lock snapping. The whispers crescendoed, 1,000 tiny voices chanting each future date in turn, as though heralding some grim calendar. Only they could read. In that final moment, I discovered the mirror beside my seat had fogged over, the glass opaque. I reflexively wiped it with the back of my hand. When the haze cleared, the mirror revealed not my own pale face, but the grinning skull of a man whose hollow eyes bored into me. He was perched on the tailgate, half his body fractured, bone and rotting flesh intertwined. His jaw locked in. Cruel rictus. Behind him, rows of crosses marched beyond the road. Behind him, every date I'd seen and many more. The whispers swelled into a deafening choir as he lifted one skeletal hand and wrote a new date across the mirror, the 2nd of July, 2025. The mirror cracked, spider webbing outward, and the truck rocked with a final thunderous blow. My vision tunneled, until the last thing I heard was the hollow ring of that metal hand against metal gate, over and over, marking the end of my march down FM 2023. The wheel hummed beneath me as I guided the old Ford down the shoulder of Country Road 153, past fields where fireflies pulsed like distant lanterns in a creeping dusk. The air was thick with a damp sweetness, the tang of cedar and rot mingling. In the same breath, and I could feel the night pressing against the windows, an insistent weight that made the hairs on my neck prickle. Ahead, the headlights carved tunnels through the gloom, illuminating ragged stones that poked from the earth like broken teeth. That was the sunken graveyard, they'd called it. Earth so soft it had swallowed half the markers, leaving their inscriptions shattered or submerged beneath moss. Tonight, there was no moon, only a bruised sky weeping faint light, and the road seemed to stretch forever, a ribbon of asphalt unwinding into a darkness so complete it felt alive. I'd come seeking solitude and distance, a chance to shake memories that dragged at me like wraiths, and I'd taken this forgotten route because it was the fastest way home. My phone had died hours ago, dead battery, dead reception, and now, with the engine's steady rumble for company, I felt certain I had nothing left but the road and these half-buried graves. I passed a leaning oak draped in Spanish moss that shivered in the stillness, and my rearview mirror flickered. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of the cemetery, robes dark as tar clinging to a shapeless form. When I blinked, it was gone. My pulse throbbed against my temples. The night air grew colder, seeping into the cabin through cracked seals. I drew the jacket tighter around my shoulders and exhaled, watching vapor swirl in the beam of my interior light. That was when I felt it, a gentle press of cold against the driver's side door, like delicate fingertips brushing the metal from the outside. My breath caught and I snapped my head to the window, but saw only my own reflection bending toward the glass, eyes wide. I flicked off the interior light. Darkness closed in, and for a moment I convinced myself it had been a trick of the light, or the wind stirring condensation on the door. But the drop in temperature was real. My skin prickled, and the van's spirit seemed to whisper around me, the engine's thrumming suddenly hollow. I lowered the window a fraction, the air flooding in heavy with earth and decay. The graveyard loomed at my side now, lines of toppled markers beyond its broken fence. I could taste the grime of the place, the tang of long dead bodies pressing upward through layers of clay. A breeze stirred, carrying the rustle of branches. And something else, a faint sigh, like breath drawn through cracked lips. I glanced over my shoulder. No headlights trailed me, no glow of another car. I was alone. Yet I felt watched, every inch of my skin crawling as though unseen eyes probed through the glass. Reluctantly, I eased the Ford forward, the tires crunching on gravel as I passed the entrance to the graveyard. A sign was half buried in the undergrowth. Sunken Grove Cemetery, the letters pitted and worn. A breeze rattled the signpost, and I squeezed the wheel, eyes locked on the road ahead. As I rolled past, something flickered at the edge of my vision, a figure flitting between two headstones, slender and curved like a stalk of grass in the wind. I blinked, and it darted closer, no more than a silhouette, but unmistakably human in form. A hand lifted, long fingers extended as if to touch me. The hairs on my arm stood on end. My grip tightened, and I accelerated, leaving the graveyard's edge behind. But the road didn't widen. Instead, it constricted, the trees leaning inward until they clawed at the roof of the truck. The engines hummed deep into a growl. My headlights flickered, sputtered, and went out. Hard hammering, I switched them back on dim white pinpricks. That revealed nothing but tangled shadows. I was cut off from the world, swallowed by night. Panic drummed in my chest, and I pounded the steering wheel, desperate to restore light. The glow returned, and in its halo I saw the figure standing in the center of the road, just beyond the hood, a woman in a tattered dress, skin pale as bone, hair matted over hollow eyes that caught the light and glowed with a hunger I couldn't name. I hit the brakes, rubber screeching as the truck slid to a stop. The woman's head tilted, and her mouth opened in a slow, impossible grin. My breath hitched. I tried the gear lever, slamming it into drive, but the truck lurched backward instead. Something held me fast, an invisible grip that tightened like ice. I slammed my fist on the horn. The blast echoed through the trees, and the woman lifted a hand to her lips, shushing me with a crooked finger. A voice rasped in my mind, a slither of words I couldn't understand but felt sear into my thoughts. A cold hand pressed against my cheek through the closed window, fingers curling over my jaw. I screamed and lunged for the door handle. It yielded easily, swinging open into the darkness. I tumbled out, rolling across gravel and jerking to my feet. The truck behind me fell silent. I backed away, eyes wide, heart rattling my ribs. The woman stayed where she was, as still as a statue, but the air around her shimmered with movement shadows pooling and unpooling like smoke drawn toward her body. I took a step back, and more shapes emerged from the tree line. Gaunt faces peering from behind oaks, arms reaching through the underbrush, fingertips brushing the air where I stood. They whispered in voices like wind over stones, calling my name. My legs trembled. I turned and ran, feet slipping on loose rock, branches tearing at my jacket, until the trees spat me out onto the road. Breathing like a wounded animal, I darted back to the driver's door. The engine was silent now, and the truck sat like a corpse under the moonless sky. I yanked the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Cold sweat slicked my palms as I pried at the lock. Behind me the whispers rose to a susurrus, an entreaty and a warning. I shoved my weight against the door. It gave way with a screech. I tumbled inside, closed the door, and slammed the lock. My hand shook as I twisted the key in the ignition. The engine caught and roared to life. Lights bloomed, illuminating. The road ahead, and there, in the middle of the asphalt, sprawled the pale figure of the woman, head turned to watch me. Behind her, the graveyard fence stood straight and new, its gate wide open. The stones glowed white under the headlights, each inscription fresh and sharp, names I didn't recognize. Dates in the future, tonight's date, tomorrow's, next week's, each promising my own final reckoning. I slammed the Ford into gear and tore down the road, the trees scraping at the sides of the cab, the dead reaching with long fingers that brushed the windows. The whispering chased me. a chorus of empty mouths chanting something I couldn't unhear. My foot pinned the pedal to the floor, heart hammering so loud I thought it might tear free. And still the figures drifted beside me, their eyes glowing with cold intent, each hand reaching, each whisper drawing me back toward the sunken graveyard where time and death had no meaning. Somewhere ahead, the road curved away from the markers, leading back to life and light. But the shadows clung, pressing closer, and I knew that once you'd been touched by those graveyard fingers, the dead never let go. My headlights flickered and one by one bulbs blew, leaving me in half-light as the woman's silhouette rose from the road and slipped into the cab, her cold breath fogging the windshield. There was no escape from County Road 153. The wheel slipped beneath me. The whispering turned to laughter, and I realized too late that the graveyard wasn't beside. The road, it was inside me, and now I walked among the sunken stones for eternity. I never planned to drive that stretch of FM 2518 after dark. Not after what they told me about those fields. But when my rig's lights caught the first glimpse of those raw tire marks carving off the asphalt, I felt the old itch of curiosity. Deep in my bones, like I'd been dared, and I never could resist. It started with the air. One minute I was breathing in the warm, pine-sweet breeze drifting off the live oaks lining the blacktop. The next, I stumbled into something acrid, like sulfur or burnt toast, that clung to my throat. My headlights fanned out over the fields. Edge in there they were fresh grooves gouged into the ground, as though some ghostly car had veered off the road in a furious swerve. The tracks made a half circle, perfect as an arc drawn by a compass, then just stopped. No skid marks. No busted fence posts. Nothing to show a car rolled or flipped, just churned earth and that brimstone smell. It made the hair prickle on the back of my neck. I killed the engine, and the night settled around me like a blanket soaked in oil. No wind stirred. In that silence, I thought I heard something shift in the grass beyond the reach of my headlights. Something long and low, maybe a shape crouched against the moonlight. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I told myself it was an animal raccoon, maybe, but I knew better. A dash of fear shivered through me, the kind that insists you stare longer when every instinct says to look away. My phone buzzed one bar, barely any signal. A text from dispatch. ETA? My fingers hovered on the keypad, but I couldn't type. I felt eyes on me, too intent to be blamed on the pines. They watched as I slipped out of the cab, boots crunching on gravel. The brimstone stink hit me again, and I blinked hard. I thought about the stories the locals whispered, how a lady in white sometimes walked through here at midnight, knee-deep in mud, calling for a child. How a phantom truck once rolled off that same road, engine roaring, screaming into the void. How those who followed the tracks never came back the same. My flashlight cut a thin beam across the churned dirt. I crouched at the edge of the first tire imprint, tracing a jagged line where metal met soil. It was fresh, the scent thick, the clay still damp and loose. I ran a finger along the lip of the crater and pulled back. My skin itched like it was burning. No matter, I could handle the itch. I was a trucker. I'd handled worse. The half circle spanned maybe 30 feet, and then nothing. The track simply vanished. I shone my light in every direction. Field grasses waved without wind, and the low hum of crickets felt muted, like a radio turned down too low. The flashlight trembled in my hand. My throat went dry, and I wondered if I might be stupid enough to dig where the tracks ended. I put a hand on the ground, pressed my palm into the mud, sucked in a little, then thought better of it. My breath came shallow. That's when I heard it, a soft crunch, like a shoe stepping on twigs. I froze. The sound came again, closer. It didn't echo, it blended with the breeze. I swung the flashlight toward the field, and for a split second, I saw a dark figure standing just past the last head-high grass. It was tall, too tall maybe, with shoulders that sloped inward as if it wore some terrible cloak. The figure tilted its head, and I saw no face. Just a blank, pale surface pulsing under the moonlight. Like fresh plaster wet with water. Every rational bone in my body screamed to run back to the cab, slam the door, and panic. But my legs wouldn't move. I blinked, and the figure was gone. No trace, no rustle, just the whisper of grass. I swallowed and forced the words, "Who's there?" My voice sounded thin, like smoke in a dead fireplace. Silence answered. I took a cautious step back, and my boots sank into a shallow depression in the field's edge. Another track, curved. I cursed under my breath and realized the perimeter was wider than I first thought. The half circle curved into the tree line on one side toward the highway on the other. It was a loop, a perfect harvest moon. Then the ground shuddered under my weight, barely perceptible but unmistakable. My heart slammed against my chest. The air quivered, and I smelled earth rising, like something deep beneath was waking. My flashlight flickered as a breeze rushed in, even though no wind should reach this enclosed field, and set the grass swaying in a rolling wave. I heard a low rumble, a distant engine funny, because the highway lay only a few yards away, but headlights never breached the veil. Instinct took over. I ran. My boots pounded across the churned dirt, hauling my heart after them. The cab of my truck rose up before me, headlights making twin moons in the dark. I yanked the door open, slammed inside, and locked it. The engine roared to life on the first turn of the key. As I shifted into drive, I dared one glance back. The field was empty, but those tracks, my tracks, etched into the ground behind me, making a perfect half circle that pointed straight at me. As if they were telling me, "You were here. We know." I floored the accelerator and tore onto FM 2518, tires squealing, headlight beams stabbing through the dark. There was no looking back. The smell of brimstone faded in the side mirror, replaced by the sharper tang of gasoline and sweat. By the time I hit the tar, I was shaking so hard I could barely keep my hands on the wheel. I made a call to dispatch. Voice trembling, claiming some mechanical issue caused me to swerve. But as I spoke, I realized the truth. Something else got under the wheels first. Something that stopped the world just outside the light. Something that waited in the mud, hungry for witnesses. I lied to them. I'm fine. Just a flat tire. But I wasn't. Not at all. Now I know better. I've driven that road in daylight, mapping the fields, looking for the circle. But nothing shows in sunlight. The grass flows uniform, the earth firm. There's no trace of churned clay or brimstone air. Only at night, when the world falls silent, can I smell that sulfur tang and see those tracks reappear, etched into the ground without erosion, without time. They wait for me in the dark, a cruel invitation. And every time I pass, I feel that old itch. That dare. In Live Oak County, legend says that when the fields swallow a soul, they leave the shape of their departure behind. Half a circle of broken earth, as if someone tried to escape, spun around and vanished. The brimstone scent is the last breath of their terror. And the phantom driver? They walk those furrows, claiming those who come too close. I don't know what they want, maybe company, maybe blood. But I know I'll never resist that dare again. Tonight, when the sun sets and FM 2518 grows quiet, I'll be back. I'll hit that half circle once more, unflinchingly. Because now I understand, the only way to survive is to finish the loop. To drive right out of that circle and into whatever waits beyond the veil. And maybe, just maybe, I'll get to the other side, or at least leave my own tracks, so someone else knows there. The highway hummed under an angry sky, thunder rolling low like the growl of some ancient beast rattling its chains. Rain pounded the pavement in sheets, turning every headlight into a blurred smear of yellow through the curtain of water. State. Highway 36 lay slick and treacherous, the stretch outside Rosenberg feeling more forgotten than forsaken, like the road had been abandoned by daylight's grace long ago. The only living thing on that road tonight was the storm itself, lashing and vengeful, but then something else emerged from the gloom. It appeared first as a flicker of motion on the shoulder, a dark silhouette against the white-hot glare of passing rigs. There was no vehicle stalled there, nothing to warrant the figure's presence. Yet as cars slowed around the bend, drivers spotted a man in heavy turnout gear, helmet dipped low, boots planted wide. His suit was smeared with ash, as if he'd crawled from the blast of some inferno. In his gloved hands he carried a battered gauge cluster, wires dangling like entrails, screens flickering with indecipherable readings. Those unlucky enough to glimpse him found themselves slowing too much, peering through rain-spattered windows as he bent over a phantom engine. One driver's radio crackled to life with static, then a tinny voice, not her own, counting out numbers, pressure, temperature, PSI. And then, as the windshield wipers swept across her face, she stared into the malevolent hush behind the glass, and thought she saw eyes glowing faintly red beneath that soot-black helmet. Whatever they measured, whatever they monitored, it felt like a judgment rendered. A sentence passed. She floored the accelerator and left the highway behind, tires hissing. On pooling water, heart hammering like a mechanical drum. But later, hours from home, she would replay that moment. The phantom fireman raising his head, pivoting to lock onto her gaze, then vanishing as lightning arced across the sky in a jagged bloom of white. No thunder followed, not at first, just the sudden silence of absence and the stench of brimstone curling in her nostrils. Other stories followed. A tow truck crew found their rig engine dead, gauges fried to charcoal. They swore they saw the silhouette pacing ahead, helmet reflector glinting like a malign beacon. They approached, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, and found footprints in the mud boot treads pressed deep, nosing toward the tree line, then abruptly stopping. The earth scorched as if burned by a forge's breath. A family en route to Houston recounted how the stranger stepped between them and the rain, shadowed by lightning. Their son, only 6, clutched his mother's hand and whispered, "He's looking for the fire, Mama." As the phantom firemen bent over their hood, the engine sputtered to life. A roar of ignition that drowned out the boy's next words, whisked away by the howl of the storm. When the mother finally regained control of the wheel, she spotted him standing on the roadside, pale in the lurid flashes, raising one charred hand in a silent farewell or a warning. Night after night, as the region groaned under summer storms, the firemen patrolled the same miles. Commuters left roses or pop cans at the pullover where he first appeared, as though hope lived in an offering to a creature of ruin. The gifts were gone by dawn, washed away or carried off by unseen hands. Some wondered if the phantom's duty was eternal, to tend the wreckage of human lives that veered too close to danger. Yet others whispered darker truths, that he demanded tribute for salvation, and that those who refused found their gauges shattered and engines seized, stranding them in the darkest hour. Then came the preacher, a stooped man in a mud-speckled SUV, who claimed divine guidance. He packed a Bible and a lantern, determined to confront the spirit. He drove into the rain, chanting psalms, and found the phantom at the usual spot, stooped over nothing gauge cluster clutched like a grim talisman. The preacher's voice faltered as he neared, tending to the lonely roadside like a congregation of one. He raised his lantern. The light caught the helmet's visor, reflecting some deep, endless void. In that black mirror, he saw faces, dozens of them, upturned mouths open in silent screams. He dropped to his knees and wailed, "Vade retro Satanus." The phantom looked at him, shifted its head, and something like laughter rattled in the thunder. The preacher scrambled backward, scrambling for the comfort of his SUV. The gauges sparked, the wires curled like living serpents, and the dashboard flickered with malevolent life. The preacher gunned the engine, tires spinning in the muck, and fled. They found him hours later, the Quran clasped in his fingers, eyes wide but empty, lips moving in a prayer he could no longer remember. Rumor spread that the phantom fireman was a long-dead volunteer who perished in a chemical plant blaze 50 years past, his body never recovered. His last act had been to crawl into burning corridors, guiding stranded workers to safety. But in those final moments, the conflagration turned him inside out, scorching his humanity until only the shell remained, fused to duty. Now, they said, he walked the highways, forever checking gauges, forever seeking out stalled souls to save or collect. On the worst of storm nights, when the wind screamed through the pines lining the roadway, radio static would flit through every station. Listeners far beyond Rosenberg reported hearing the fireman's own broadcast, voice distorted but solemn, pressure steady, temperature rising, 4 minutes to critical. Evacuate immediately. And then the signal dissolved into a rush of static, leaving only the thunder's echo. Those who heeded the warning felt their cars shudder as some unseen force gripped the axle, shifting them away from danger. When dawn broke, they would find their gauges corroded, engines pitted with rust that defied explanation. Others ignored the voice. They pushed on, heedless of the warning. Their cars stalled, engines died, and they stepped out to find the phantom leaning over the hood. No words passed. He only reached into his suit pocket and held up a broken, glass-covered gauge, the needle, frozen at 0. Then lightning split the sky, and the phantom glanced skyward. The thunder answered with a deafening crack, and the travelers knew, too late, that the gauge measured more than engine temperature. It measured heartbeats, and theirs. We're running out. In time, the stretch of State Highway 36 gained a reputation as cursed ground. Tow trucks refused calls. Bumper-to-bumper reports flagged disasters before they happened. Local legend crowned the phantom fireman king of the storm, guardian of the lost but also collector of the condemned. And still he walked, shoulders squared. Against wind and rain, helmet visor down, hands busy with gauges that flickered in spectral light. If you find yourself on that road during a storm lights dimming, engine sputtering, know that help may come. You might feel a presence. You might hear a voice through static. You may even see him there, curving around your fender, soot-caking his gloves. Don't panic. Don't shout. Roll down your window and speak his name if you know it. Ask for mercy. Pray he finds you worthy. Then step back as the lightning cracks the sky and watch as he performs his grim inspection. When he's gone, your engine may roar back to life. Your gauges may dance. The storm may relent. But remember this: the phantom fireman demands a toll, paid in seconds of your heartbeat, paid in the echo of thunder beneath your skull. And though you escape, he remains forever walking the shoulder of State Highway 36, waiting for the next storm, the next stalled soul, the next gauge to check, the next life to mark in the flash of lightning. The night air was heavy with the scent of wet limestone and decaying oak leaves as Frank Lambert eased his Ford Ranger onto FM 1585, the wipers stamping a stuttering rhythm against the windshield. Headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating a ribbon of blacktop that wound through the rolling hills of Kerr County. He'd taken this road dozens of times, hauling feed to ranches south of Hunt, but tonight something felt different, like the land itself was holding its breath. A low mist clung to the fields, blurring the edges of the stone wall that ran alongside the highway, and beyond it, The shapes of gnarled live oaks leaned over as though conspiring in silent witness. Frank's radio crackled, the AM station drifting in and out. Somewhere between the static, a mournful fiddle tune teased the edges of his consciousness, making him blink twice. He shrugged off the chill and nudged the wheel. His headlights caught on the moss-covered wall. That's when he saw it, a face, twisted in anguish, crouched atop the stones. Frank's heart jerked. He slammed on the brakes, tires squealing against the damp asphalt. The truck fishtailed and nearly jackknifed before he wrestled it to a stop. In the beam of his headlights, the wall stretched empty. Only gray stones, slick with algae, and the mist weaving through them like pale fingers. He leaned forward, sweat beating at his temples despite the cool air. The radio sputtered and died, leaving silence so complete it felt like the world holding its breath. Frank stepped out, boots thudding on the roadside gravel. Rain fell in fine needles, ghosting over his shoulders. He approached the wall, flashlight in hand, the beam trembling. The stones rose in a broken line, jagged and uneven, whispering of something ancient. He crouched, training the light on each crevice. Nothing. No faces, no eyes reflecting back. Just stone and moss, water pooling in shallow depressions. Frank laughed, a short bark that tasted bitter. "Get a grip, man," he muttered, wiping rain from his brow. He straightened, turned to head back and froze. 2 feet away, perched like a gargoyle, was the face he'd seen. Pale skin stretched over a skull-shaped head, hollows for eyes that glowed with a feral hunger. Its lips peeled back in a grin of jagged teeth. It tilted sideways, studying him, as though amused by his terror. Frank's breath hitched. He stumbled backward, tripping over a stray rock, and fell hard. His flashlight skidded across the road. Rolling to rest against a roadside reflector, its beam a single, wavering line of light. When the flashlight stuttered out, he was forced into darkness. Rain spattered his cheeks. He heard a soft rustling above him, like dry leaves shifting. He crawled backward, hand reaching out, fingertips brushing cold steel of the truck's tire. He gripped it and pulled himself upright, heart jackhammering. The creature crouched on the wall, its mouth opening in a soundless scream. Then it vanished. Frank yanked himself back into the cab, slammed the door. His shirt clung to his chest, soaked through. Hands shaking, he fumbled for the keys. The engine caught with a growl. Headlights flashed back to life, and for a moment the wall lay empty. He eased forward, pulse pounding in his ears. The radio flickered on, the fiddle tune rising clearer than before, as if mocking him. Minutes later, the road straightened and the mist receded. The stone wall disappeared behind a bend. Frank's chest heaved. He flicked the wipers to clear his face. He glanced in the rearview mirror, only the empty road receding into darkness. He exhaled, willing his pulse to slow. Then his headlights caught a gleam on the pavement, a single, perfect hoofprint, edges crisp, like something heavy had pressed into the tar. He frowned. Levers and gauges glowed silently on his dashboard. He tapped the brakes. The wheel jerked. He pulled to the shoulder, heart racing. He grabbed a flashlight from under the seat and stepped out again. Rain had stopped, and the world was hushed, the only sound his own breathing. He knelt beside the hoofprint, the flashlight beam skimming its sharp edges. He traced the curve with a finger. It was cold, slick with rain, and impossible cattle don't have cloven hooves like that. All too neat. His beam drifted upward to the crest of the roadside embankment. There, half hidden in the shadows and low brush, stood a figure tall, slender, clothed in what looked like the uniform of an early 1900s ranch hand, oil-stained overalls and a wide-brimmed hat shadowing its face. The brim dipped low, but the edges of a pale grin caught the light as it tilted its head. Frank's blood congealed. His legs refused to cooperate. The figure raised a hand, slender fingers curled like talons. Rain began again, soft, staccato. Drumming that sounded like applause. Frank scrambled back into the truck, slamming the door shut. He revved the engine, ripped into gear, and tore back onto the highway. Behind him, through the rear window, he swore he saw the figure step forward, emerging fully into view. Its boots were caked with mud, and in their reflection the stone wall had sprouted fresh faces twisted, half-formed, mouths open in silent screams. Then, as the truck's taillights smeared red through the rain, the figure vanished. He didn't stop until he hit the lights of Kerrville. At the gas station on Water Street, an old attendant watched him pull in, shaken and soaked. Frank left the engine running, stepped out, and stumbled over. "Anything wrong with the wall on FM 1585? He blurted, voice cracking. The attendant frowned. "Stone wall? You mean the old Givens wall out past Ingram? Ain't nobody touched that for 100 years. It fell half to bits back in the 30s. Frank shook his head. "No, man. The stone one by the highway. Faces. People up there?" The attendant's eyes widened. "Son, you best leave that wall alone. Folks say if you stare too long you lose more than your mind. And if you run, they'll chase you down the road." Frank swallowed. His mind whirred with the memory of those faces, crouched atop the stones, vanishing, reappearing, watching. He glanced back toward FM 1585. The road lay empty, the mist still clinging to its edges, the distant hills rising in dark waves. He started to speak, but the attendant waved him off. "You'll not make sense till dawn. Best get home and lock your doors." Frank nodded dumbly, climbed back in, and drove off without filling the tank. The radio crackled again, the fiddle, tune looping in his head. As he crossed the Guadalupe River Bridge, he glanced to his left and saw, perched on the crumbling parapet, a single twisted face, crouched among the stones, grinning at him in the new dawn's first light. It vanished. The moment he blinked, his headlights carving a hole in the coming day. And Frank Lambert knew he'd never look away again. The road stretched before me like a ribbon of ink under a swollen moon, the taillights of my aging Chevy casting red ripples over the scrub and mesquite. It was well past midnight, and the tumbleweeds rattled bones of old fences, whispering secrets. As they tumbled across the asphalt, I'd driven this stretch of U.S. Highway 290 100 times in daylight, the rolling hills and farms around Brenham and Elgin a familiar rhythm in my wheelhouse. But at this hour, in the hollow silences between hamlets, the highway felt more like a grave open, exposed, waiting. That's when I heard it, the distant toll of a bell, rich and resonant, echoing across the fields as though rung from a tower. Half a mile away, my foot eased off the accelerator. I checked the gauge half a tank, plenty to reach Elgin, but the bell came again, insistent. Dong. Dong, dong. It was deeper than any church bell I'd ever heard, lower and heavier, like iron dragging through water. It sank into my chest, a summons. I slowed to 30 miles an hour, the Chevy's engine chuffing behind me, unsure. My headlights carved, seam lines through the night, but on either side there was nothing but pasture and scrub. No schoolhouse. No church, nothing but the land, flat and dim. The bell tolled again, its sound closer now, as if wrapped around the metal ribs of the road. Itself. I pulled to the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires, and killed the engine. The silence that followed was so deep I could hear the tumbleweed clack against the undercarriage, and the world contracted to that solitary heartbeat between bell tones. Then the bell tolled once more, and I realized it had shifted out. Of the distance, as if a phantom had carried it closer. Against every instinct, I stepped out, boots crunching in the gravel. The air smelled of ozone and rust. I fumbled for a flashlight, but before I could find it, the bell tolled again, and I saw it. A shimmer of light where the haze met the horizon, an outline of timber and stone that shouldn't have been there. My memory insisted that the schoolhouse had been torn down in '29, burned to the ground when lightning struck, or maybe by arson. Nobody was certain anymore, papers faded or lost. But there it stood, a low, squat building of rough-hewn beams, framed by skeletal trees. Moonlight glinted off broken window panes, and ivy crawled up the walls like veins. A gust of wind rattled the bell tower, a battered cupola, perched atop the roof, and I could swear I heard laughter, high and brittle, echoing inside the empty halls. The invitation was clear. Come closer. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd wake the dead buried under that soil. The souls of children who'd once sat at desks with chalk-dusted fingers, their eyes shining with hope. They were gone now, smoke and ash, but something remained. I should have run. I should have slammed the door and peeled out, tires spraying gravel, but a crooked magnet in my chest drew me forward. The door hung ajar, creaking like a pendulum as I pushed in. Moonlight pooled on the warped wooden floor, illuminating row after row of empty desks, their surfaces gouged with initials and shapes that time hadn't erased. The walls were blackened near the back, scorched in a jagged arc as though the fire had licked through the room, hungry for something more than wood. The bell tolled overhead, a single clang that reverberated through my bones. Then it stopped. The silence pressed in, and the air turned cold, so cold I could see my breath in ragged puffs. I fumbled for the flashlight and clicked it on. Beam wobbling in my palm cut through the dark, revealing a chalkboard smeared with white letters. Sometime they'll know whose hands rang this bell. The handwriting, small and neat, ended in a loop that swirled like a child's scrawl. My hand shook, sweat slicking my neck. I clicked the light on the bell tower above, and it revealed a rusted bell, its surface pockmarked and crusted with age. A rope hung from its clapper, frayed and gray. I reached for it, compelled, and the second I grasped the coarse twine, that promise of dread snapped into place. The rope slid through my fingers, tugging me upward as though wrapping me in its coils, and before I could balk, the bell tolled once, twice, 3 times each stroke worse than the last, a drumbeat of sorrow mixed with triumph. Below me, a sound, like stifled crying, rose from the floorboards. First one voice, then another, milling together in a chorus of fractured pleas. "Teacher, help us, he's coming." I froze, chest tightening around my lungs. The voices crescendoed as the bell rang, and suddenly the schoolhouse seemed to breathe. The walls inhaled with me, the desks quivered, the floor groaned beneath the weight of unseen footsteps. The voices wavered, and then, above them, a single clear note. "You stayed." It was a child's voice, soft but unwavering, and it wrapped around my mind. My feet left the desk where I'd cramped myself to ring the bell, dangling over nothing but darkness and those flickering whispers. I tried to climb back, scramble away from the rope's grip, but the rope burned like fire in my palms. I wrenched and twisted, but the bell tower spun me in its orbit, higher, until the ground dropped away and the circle of moonlight through the windows looked like a distant halo. The voices turned urgent, chanting in unison, "Ring the bell, ring. The bell, ring the bell." My arms protested, my vision narrowed, and with a final tug, I felt the rope give. The bell chimed one last time, slow and resonant. Then everything went black. I woke on the shoulder of the highway, the dawn gilding the horizon, dew beating on the windows. My door was open, and shattered splinters of what looked like chalk littered the gravel beside me. The schoolhouse was gone, just empty highway stretching east toward Elgin, no sign of timber or stone. The rope lay coiled on the seat, thick, gray, frayed, but when I reached for it, Its fibers slipped through my fingers like smoke. In my palm, I felt something tiny and hard, a sliver of chalk, white and cold. I looked up as the sun bled gold. Across the road. No bell tolled, no laughter echoed. Only the distant sound of traffic waking in the morning. I got back behind the wheel. Chalk smudged on my fingertips, and I drove on, the schoolhouse never appearing again on any map. But at night, if I'm ever on that stretch at midnight, I can still hear the bells slow, inevitable, calling me home. I was hauling a load of sheet metal northbound when the sun dipped below the Gulf's flat horizon and the sky turned bruised purple. Traffic had thinned to almost nothing, just me and the endless ribbon of asphalt called Deer Park Road. Just. On the edge of Houston's sprawl. My rig's headlights cut through the dusk, but out there in the median, something else was waiting. I spotted it first in my mirror, a pale shape slipping between the streetlights, long coat flapping like broken. Wings. I thought it might be a hitchhiker at first, an odd sight out here where no one ever bothered to walk. But as I slowed, it stopped, turned its head, and caught my eye. In that instant, 2 points of red flame glowed where pupils ought to be. My throat clenched around a scream I could barely choke out. I hit the gas, tires screeching, and caught one frantic glimpse of the coat black as oil, soaked through in places I dared not consider. I slammed the rig into a wider curve, telling myself it was a trick of reflection, something in my mirrors playing games on my exhaustion. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it beneath my rib cage, rattling my sternum with each thump. I glanced at the exit sign 2 miles ahead, Spillway Road. I needed walls of concrete and streetlights and people, civilization. But as I closed on that exit, the road stretched before me in the headlights, and the exit loomed faster than the mile markers could count down. I swept onto the ramp, heart racing, expecting the city's yellow glow around the bend, but it never came. Instead, the ramp curved back onto itself, looping under the highway, pitching me right back onto Deer Park Road. My rig rattled over. The concrete seams and landed gently, the same stretch of median lights ahead. My blood was ice now, my fingers sliding uselessly over the steering wheel. I glanced again. The trench-coated figure stood in the middle of the median, still, painted in the headlights, unmoving. Like a scarecrow of blood and shadow so tall, it nearly grazed the low-hanging electric cables. I turned the wheel and floored it, skidding across the lane. The engine growled, protesting, but it propelled me onward. My headlights wavered as I shot past the median, and for a second I thought I'd left it behind. Then I saw it materialize at the edge of my beam, emerging from the darkness like a specter summoned from some hellish well. It stepped onto the shoulder, coat flapping, and its eyes burned, red as fresh embers. I could see now that nothing human walked beneath that coat. Elongated limbs too thin, the shoulders iron sharp, face hidden beneath a brimless hood, mouth gauged open in an imitation of a grin. I roared past it, past the glow of the street lamps, and reached the next exit, Black Hawk Boulevard. I nearly slammed on the brakes when I saw what lay ahead. A chain-link tunnel under an overpass, taillights of parked cars lined along the concrete walls. No exit signs, no welcome lights, just shadows pooling in the corners like spilled ink. I had no choice. I rolled through, low gear rumble echoing, and felt every shudder of cracked pavement jump through the cab. When I emerged, I was back again on Deer Park Road. It was impossible. Every landmark felt the same. The same orange glow overhead, the same patches of pine scrub reaching low over the guardrails, the same medians littered with shattered bottles and highway trash. I checked my mirrors frantically. The hooded figure blazed in red at the edge of the median ahead, 2 torches in its head as if mocking my terror. I swallowed bile. I tried the radio no dial station, nothing but static. The tachometer ticked. Up, heat gauge rising. My hands were slick, white-knuckled on the wheel. Night wind brushed across the cab, carrying a faint smell of wet dirt and burnt rubber. I pressed my foot to the pedal, refusing to let this thing make me stop. But last time I'd almost left it behind, only to find it waiting again, patient. As a trap, I reached another off-ramp and God help me, I took it. I saw a flicker of neon in the mirror, a lonely convenience mart flickering like a last hope. I steered toward it, praying for people, for light, for any goddamn human being who could tell me what the hell was going on. I turned onto a dirt road flanked by tall oaks, heart pounding so loud I thought the windows would shatter. The trees stood like silent sentinels, black arms stretched across the sky. I saw the March sign Good Day Groceries dangling crooked. One bulb sputtering, I eased the rig up to the curb and killed the engine. Silence pressed in. I slid out, boots crunching gravel. The Mart's fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead. No clerk behind the counter, no shopping carts, nothing but the door hanging half open, lights blinking in and out. I shook as I stepped inside, blood pounding in my ears. Nobody. Just empty shelves and the stale smell of faulty air conditioning. I spun around, eyes darting, and caught movement in the reflection of the glass door. Behind me, in the parking lot, the trench-coated figure glided across the gravel, one torch eye flickering with each step. I backed up, tripping over a fallen magazine rack. My breath came in ragged gasps, adrenaline flooding my limbs. The door slammed shut, and the fluorescent tubes finally died, leaving me in a cocoon of merciless dark. My flashlight being trembled as I flicked it on, carving a thin line of pale light. I aimed it at the door, nothing but black. It kicked it once like a foot, clad in some ancient boot, just a dull thud. And then there was silence again. I ran to my rig, claws on the cab door, yanking it open. I swung my leg over the running board, slammed in the seat, and cranked the B. Engine. The moment it caught, I floored the throttle. Tires spat gravel. Engine roared. Headlights arced over the cracked pavement. I swerved back to the highway access ramp. My mirrors showed me hauling ass, wheel turned, hooded shape uselessly tracing the edge of the lot, frozen for the moment. But waiting, I burst onto the highway Deer Park Road again. The traffic lights overhead blinked red, then green, then red. I had obeyed the law like some idiot tourist. I pulled to a stop at the next light, chest heaving. When it blinked green, I eased forward, afraid to look out my mirror, but I did. I had to know if it was behind me. It was there, standing in the median at the green light. Its red eyes flickered like insult. I watched as it lifted one long arm, pointing at me, finger as sharp as bone. Then it blinked, the light changed, and I crashed through the intersection. No horns, no sirens, nothing. I rose back to speed, tires humming the same cursed ground. I drove on, sunrise minutes away, and saw the exit for Beltway 8. I swerved toward it, heart lodged in my throat, hoping to find safety in the city morning. But as I crested the ramp, it curved back, twisting under itself, looping right back to Deer Park Road. And there it stood again, eyes glowing, coat rippling like shadow. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I know that no matter how fast I drove, no matter which exit or off-ramp I took, I'd only come back to the same stretch of asphalt that never ends. Deer Park Road, they call it. But there's only one way off, and I haven't figured it out yet. Sometimes I catch that glint of red in my mirrors, a promise you'll never escape. And I pray that one day I'll break the loop, find the real dawn, and leave the trench-coated hunter in the dust. Until then, I keep this rig humming, eyes fixed ahead, and every so often I glance that way, because I know if I don't, Its glowing eyes will catch mine again, and then I'll never stop. Running. There was something in the stillness beneath those iron trestles on Paris Road, something that didn't belong to the present day. Jared Miller first heard the whistle just after midnight, a sharp, keening cry that cut through the humid summer. Air like a blade. He was parked by the old loading dock, headlights off, windows down to catch the breeze off Big Cypress Bayou. The moonlit river shimmered faintly, but the tracks above him lay empty and rusted. No train had rolled this way since the war effort redirected rail 60 years ago. Yet the whistle sounded again, closer this time, as if some phantom locomotive was bearing down on him, its breath rattling his skull. First he thought it an elaborate prank local kids with a cheap speaker, hiding somewhere in the weeds. Then the rails began to vibrate, a low, mournful thrumming, and the ground beneath his feet trembled in sync. Jared pressed his hands against the hood of his truck to steady himself. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was alive, bristling with grief. It built and built until it felt as though the night itself was screaming, crying out for some impossible passenger stranded between worlds. He drove forward, headlights slicing through the darkness. The trestle loomed above, girders like skeletal, ribs against the night sky. The tracks vanished into blackness on each side, swallowed up by overgrowth. He parked again, heart thudding, and watched the underbelly of the bridge. The whistle came once more, sorrowful and insistent. A cold draft curled around his ankles. He felt the hairs on his neck rise. Below, in the gloom, he thought he saw something pale as bone moving across the ties. "Is someone there?" His voice cracked. The echo answered him, but not with words. Instead, the whistle split the silence and something slid onto the tracks. A shape, hunched, indistinct. It carried a lantern, its flame flickering as though underwater. The light cast twisted shadows on the rusted rails, dancing across the wood ties and tangled weeds. As Jared watched, paralyzed, the figure lifted an arm as if beckoning him closer. He stepped forward. Each step seemed wrong in the hush, like he was intruding on a solemn ceremony. The gravel crunched beneath his boots, and the figure jerked its head toward him. Under the hood of that faded oilskin coat, Jared thought he caught sight of a face, but it dissolved before he could focus. When he looked again, the lantern was raised higher, light spilling onto the rails, illuminating the rotten wood and patches of moss. Then the lantern winked out. Darkness swallowed the tracks. The whistle poured through the trestles again, louder, urgent. Jared's breath caught in his throat. He turned to run, but the ground convulsed, shoving him forward. The trestle overhead shook, metal groaning in protest, and a gust of wind roared up from the river, carrying with it the faint perfume of burning coal and engine smoke. He tasted ash on his tongue. He stumbled, flailing, and caught himself against the steel beam. When he dared to look back down the track, there, impossibly, was a train, a locomotive out of another era, its pilot edge raised on the ties, wheels glowing faintly red. It bore no carriages, only the engine, looming like a ghostly sentinel. The headlamp wasn't glass, but a hole of darkness in the front, absorbing light instead of casting it. The engine exhaled steam in ragged puffs, and the whistle shrieked again, cutting through Jared's mind. He backed away, panic surging, but the train did not advance. It sat there on the rails as though waiting. The air grew frigid, breath clouding. In front of him, the sound of water dripping echoed somewhere, though the air was bone dry. Then, clear as a bell, he heard voices. Fragmented whispers carried on that mournful whistle, syllables half-formed, names spoken in a lingual rasp. Jared Miller. The name he had never told anyone sounded in his ears. He pressed his hands over his ears, but the sound persisted. growing and then trailing off like smoke. Against every sane instinct, he moved forward again, drawn by a terrible curiosity. The lantern-bearing figure reappeared at his shoulder, silent and still, and the train's whistle modulated into a keening cry that felt almost human. Jared reached out, fingertips grazing cold metal. He felt a pulse, a terrible life in the steel of the engine. It vibrated under his touch like the heart of something enormous and sorrowful. He drew back, stumbling, and the whistle changed pitch, a minor chord of unimaginable sorrow. Somewhere in the blackness beyond the trestles, a faint bell tolled. The figure behind him lifted its lantern once more, the light a dim glow that seemed to come from deep within its chest rather than the glass. Jared realized the figure wore an old railroad conductor's cap, its brim frayed. Under that brim, sockets of empty darkness where eyes should have been. The lantern's glow reflected off a polished brass badge pinned to the coat. Jefferson and Trinity Railroad, 1892. A memory stabbed his mind unbidden. His great-grandfather, a brakeman who vanished on these tracks during the 100-year flood. The local paper called it an accident, a misstep, drowned in the rising waters. But Jared's grandmother always whispered that he stayed, called by a whistle in the dead of night, drawn into the river's floodwaters beneath the tracks. Jared's pulse hammered. The figure muttered something, words of longing, of loss, and lifted the lantern to its face. The darkness in those sockets swirled and pulsed, and for the briefest moment he saw his great-grandfather's features, stoic, eyes wide with anguish, lips parted as though to speak, but no words coming. The lantern flickered, casting fleeting light on a name etched in the metal of the engine side, Engine No. 7. It was his great-grandfather's train. He shivered, overwhelmed by grief that was not his own. The whistle shrieked once more, and the world tilted. He felt himself drawn forward, onto the ties, heart thundering, the phantom train beginning to glow brighter, its whistle demanding release, its steam-hissing tears dot with a surge of fear-fueled strength. Jared tore his gaze away and bolted, sprinting back toward his truck. The tracks behind him thrummed like a living thing, groaning under the weight of the past. He didn't look back until he slammed into the cab, slammed the door, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, drowning out the whistle. In his rearview mirror he saw the trestle, steel girders silent under moonlight, and the tracks empty once more. But as he drove away, the whistle followed, faint but unceasing, woven into the pulse of the night. And he knew that the engine no longer waited for him. It waited for something else to finish its journey across a phantom future, calling out for souls trapped between then and now, and echoing down Paris Road until the end of time. The evening sun set low over the limestone ridges, leaving the oaks and cedars in long, crawling shadows as Sarah eased her sedan onto County Road 372. The shoulder was soft with fallen needles, but the pavement was more intact than the old picnic tables that lined a pull-off a quarter-mile back. She'd passed them twice already, their oak boards splintered like shattered bones, the metal legs twisted by rust and decay. A county worker's job half done, abandoned tools still leaning against a wooden post. She glanced at her rear view. Mirror-empty road. But for a moment, she was certain she'd seen something dash across, something slender and too quick. A ripple of unease settled like a stone in her gut. She rolled the window down. The air smelled of damp earth, sour blossoms, and something metallic. Sap, she told herself. The fruit trees fringing the pull-off were older than anyone knew there. Twisted trunks sagging under the weight of lumpy apples turning black at the core. A trick of reflection had given them the look of bruised flesh. Sarah parked by the tables, just as she often did when she needed a break from endless miles of highway. Her job for the day was done. She delivered antiques to that big Victorian down the road, and now she wanted a snack, a moment to stretch her legs. She retrieved a bottle of water, cracked it open, and stepped onto the gravel, the cap hissing, like something exhaling. The picnic table nearest her slumped forward, 2 legs shorter than they should be, and she reached out, pressing a hand against the rough wood. It felt sticky. She wiped her palm on her jeans and caught a droplet shimmering against the denim, deep red like blood. Fingers trembling, she leaned closer. The sap, she reminded herself, bled from broken limbs, scientific enough, but the pattern was weird. Thick beads that oozed from splits as though the trees were wounded by knives. A sudden breeze whispered through the branches, carrying a sound so faint she thought her mind was playing tricks. Footsteps. Barely there, as if someone or something was padding around her car on the other side. She turned her head. Nothing. The sky was streaked with pink clouds, the last warmth of day vanishing. But the sap still pulsed. Her phone vibrated in her back pocket. A text from her brother. Don't stay out too late. Cows spooked again near Miller's pasture. Wild tailies, hysterical texts from a tired sibling who still thought this road was haunted. Sarah swallowed, forcing a smile she alone could see. She should have heeded his warning, parked somewhere better lit. Instead, she'd chosen to stay. She bent to pick up her backpack. In the corner of her eye, movement aflash between the trees. She squinted. Maybe a deer. But deer didn't circle cars. Deer didn't know how to stay just at the edge of vision, like a mirage. She backed toward her sedan, every step crunching the gravel, each one echoing loud enough that the silence pushed back. She felt watched. She reached the driver's door and paused. The footsteps were louder now, deliberate, heel-toe. Heel, toe around the back of the car. She pressed her palm to the door handle, the metal trembling under her palm. Her breath quickened. She swung the door open, slid inside, slammed it shut. Locked out, heart pounding. Eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, she watched the trees shiver. The fruit tree sap dripped onto the gravel beside the picnic table, a tiny puddle growing crimson. The car's interior light glowed weakly, casting pale halos on the leather seats. She fumbled for the ignition. The engine turned over sluggishly, coughing as though reluctant to start. Footsteps. Right there, beyond the trunk. She clenched the steering wheel, chest tight, and the engine caught. Lights pierced the dusk. She eased the car forward, but tires on gravel spat stones. She glanced into the mirror, nothing but the dark outline of branches. She exhaled, but her lungs burned. She pushed the sedan back onto the road, turning the wheel too hard. The tires rasped, and she felt the car tilt. Off the asphalt, one tire, sinking into the soft shoulder. She cursed and reversed, gunning the engine, but the car refused to grip. Panic flickered. She stomped the brake and wrenched the wheel, yanking her door open. Once more, she was out, dead weight, ankle twisting. In the gravel. She limped to the front, breathing harshly, hands trembling as she hit the wheel. The engine died. The world went silent again, except for her ragged breaths and the low hum in her ears. She closed her eyes, calling herself an idiot for stopping in the first place. Calm down, reach for the phone. Call AAA, but the vibration in her pocket insisted. Otherwise an incoming call now. She punched up the screen. Unknown. She tapped answer. Hello? Her voice cracked. The line was dead for a second, static. Then, a low, raspy breath. That was it. No words. She pressed the disconnect button, blinking in the gloom. Her own phone felt alien in her hand. She looked up, scanning the trees lining the road. The fruit trees stood like silent sentinels, their twisted limbs drawing reaching, gnarled patterns. Against the bruised sky, something shifted to her left. She whirled. Thick sap oozed from a horizontal branch that dipped too low, bright and wet in the headlight's afterglow. She blinked, and what she'd thought a branch was now something else. A crooked arm ending in long, stubbled fingers. A hand. Minutes ago, it had been bark. Bark didn't finger wooden beams as if testing for prey. Bark didn't twitch with alien grace. The hand fell away, and a face erupted from the trunk, eyes like hollow pits, lips peeled back to show shattered teeth, mouth sagging as though pulled by hunger. The face was too human to be wood, too wooden to be flesh, and it stared with an urge so primal she felt rooted in place. She stumbled. The face vanished in a spray of sap that dripped onto her jacket, staining it a color like dark rust. Behind her, tires squealed as a distant car barreled down the road, one headlight at a time. She dared a glance. A pickup truck coasting into view, headlights dipping as it hit a gully. She waved frantically, but the truck slowed only marginally, its driver too far to see her. She spun around. The tree face was closer now, dozens of trees, dozens of faces' eyes glinting along the line of sap-bleeding trunks. They circled her. Car, stepping from one tree to another in an unholy procession. Sarah ran. Gravel bit into her palms as she sprinted across the shoulder toward the taillights of the pickup. But the figures emerged from the woods on either side of the road, their limbs creaking like doors in a storm. They moved silently, purposefully, funneling her forward. She reached the road center and threw herself at the truck's passenger side, yanking the handle. The door wouldn't open. She looked back. The sedan sat where she left it, headlights on, engine alive, but not a sound came from it. Behind her, the creatures stood in a ragged line, sap dripping through broken bark, pooling at their feet. Their heads tilted in unison, focusing on her, the lone heartbeat amid deadwood. Then the truck horn blared. A startled yelp from the driver's seat. The creatures froze. Sarah gulped, turning toward the cab. Through the window, she saw an old man, white beard stained with tobacco, hands trembling on the wheel. He stared at her with pity that turned quickly to fear as he clocked the hover of bark-skinned figures behind her. He slammed the gear shift. Into reverse, rear wheels kicking up gravel, and reversed toward her. Sarah threw her bag into the back seat, scrambling inside as soon as the door opened. The old man slammed his own door, locked it, and roared forward. They sped down County Road 372, the car's engine rumbling as though in protest. But the trees stayed at the edge of the headlights, leaning forward as if calling them back. Sarah cradled her arms around her chest, listening to the engine's panicked rhythm behind her. The old man kept glancing in the rearview mirror, sliding the beam to illuminate the edge of the woods. No faces. Just trees swaying in the wind. They didn't speak until they hit the blacktop again. The pavement smooth now, the picnic tables hidden behind a bend. The man's voice came, rough as gravel. "You best leave this road at dawn. They only wake when the sun goes." He stared straight ahead, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Sarah nodded, swallowing. She pressed her palms against her thighs, feeling the sap still on her jeans. "Thank you," she managed. I thought I was going crazy." He didn't answer. For miles they drove in silence until the lights of Bandera winked on the horizon. The houses began, porch lights blinking, radio music leaking onto the street. The trees fell away, replaced by telephone poles and manicured lawns. The man finally exhaled. County Road 372 is old. Some say it was built over a burial ground. Others say folks went missing down there. Trees keep their secrets, but sometimes a wound festers. That pull off, they come out then. Sarah swallowed a lump. She thought of the notebook she kept, recording urban legends for her blog. Now she had more than rumor, she had memory. She felt the sap stiffen on her jeans, a sticky reminder that the world beneath the bark had bled onto her life. At the edge of town, the man stopped the truck. "You fix your car?" he asked. She shook her head, voice trembling. "It's fine. I won't go back." He nodded. "Good." He reached out, put a hand on her shoulder. It was warm, human. "Don't stay out past sunset again. Some roads forget what they once were. And some trees, if you listen, remember everything." Sarah stepped out into the street. The truck rumbled away, tail lights retreating into the night. She watched until it was gone, then looked back toward County Road 372. The bend swallowed the pavement in shadow. No picnic tables, no trees bleeding sap, just the hush of midnight creeping across asphalt. She turned her heel and walked toward the lights of town, carrying with her the echo of footsteps that had circled her car, the feeling of being watched by hungry trees. And she knew she'd never forget. I first saw the bicyclist on FM 972 just south of the Blanco County line, where the road bends like a crooked finger and the wild grasses whisper warnings in the dusk breeze. It was late May, the kind of evening that hangs heavy with heat and promises of thunderstorms. I remember the smell of asphalt blistering under the dying light, the air thick enough to cut with a knife. I was on my way back to Austin from a conference in Round Rock, ears still ringing from too many keynote speakers, eyes stinging from the unrelenting glare of the sun on windshields. I'd slowed to 80, the speed limit 70, but that curve ahead made me hesitate, and that's when I saw him. He came around the bend on the wrong side of the road, pedaling as if driven by some urgent, solitary purpose. A lantern dangled from his handlebars, the flame inside flickering like the last heartbeat of a dying thing. He wore clothes that looked centuries old, a heavy, moth-eaten coat and trousers pinned tight at the ankle, as though he'd dressed for a journey that would never end. His face was hidden in shadow, but the lantern's glow caught the glint of his eyes, sunken hollows reflecting the ghost of the road behind me. My pulse skidded like gears in a failing engine. I blinked hard, pressed my foot down on the gas. The gravel on the shoulder crunched under my tires as I drove past, too startled to honk the horn, too afraid to look away. When I glanced back, the bicyclist was gone. No tire tracks marred the pavement, no glimmer of lantern light. It was as if the road had simply swallowed him whole. I laughed at myself, stupid, spooked, fooling myself into seeing ghosts. I shook the thought off, told myself it was twilight tricking my eyes, exhaustion and the long hours behind the wheel. But the thought wouldn't let me go, nagging like a wasp trapped behind my eyeball. 2 nights later I was driving the same stretch, this time at nearly midnight. A storm was rolling in from the west, lightning flickering against a dark canvas of clouds. I'd stopped at a gas station for coffee black, way too sweet, and the cashier warned me about the lantern rider if anyone asked. I paid no mind to her half grin and crooked teeth. I'd heard worse tall tales on the road. I left the station, ears humming with static, and when I turned onto FM 972, the world had slipped inside a steely downpour. The road was slicker, than spilled oil. My wipers thrashed at the windshield like clumsy dancers. That's when I heard it, the soft, rhythmic click of bicycle spokes cutting through the roar of rain. I slowed to 20 miles per hour, heart hammering. Up ahead, just past the guardrail where the road crests that nasty curve, a figure emerged, lantern in one hand, handlebars in the other. Pedaling directly into oncoming traffic. I tapped the horn twice, tap, just as the story said. The bicyclist paused, shoulders hunched, then turned slowly toward me. His lantern cast grotesque shadows across his face, revealing cheekbones like broken shards of bone. Where eyes should have been, there was nothing but dark hollows brimming with light. A skeletal hand rose from the handlebars, long fingers curling in a gesture that felt like both a greeting and a curse. The horn rang a third time, but he neither flinched nor faltered. He simply held that gesture, frozen for a heartbeat too long. I barely had time to yank the wheel right before I hit the brake. My tires screeched. Gravel sprayed like blood across wet pavement. And then nothing. The bicyclist vanished into the metal rail as though he were mist dissolving under the sudden flush of headlights. My car coasted to a stop 100 yards past the curve. Rain pounded the roof. The lantern's light was gone. The road empty. I sat there with my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, breath coming in ragged gasps. Somewhere in the darkness a lone owl hooted, sounding eerily like a voice waking from a nightmare. I turned on the interior light, pulled out my phone-dead battery. Of course. Nobody passed that stretch of road at midnight. There was no service, no one to call. The storm had knocked down lines a mile back. I tried to reason. Maybe someone had done a road prank. A guy in old clothes riding through the rain with a battery-powered lantern. But who would pick that curve, that lonely, windswept stretch? And who would vanish into a guardrail mid-ride? I sat for what felt like hours until the rain slowed to a whisper. I hesitated only a moment before stepping out, the cold air slapping me. I walked back to the curve, every crunch of gravel under my boots echoing in the stagnant night. The guardrail looked normal, dented in places, rusted at the bolts, but no seam or crack where a man could melt away. The lantern lay in the ditch, half buried under a brush of weeds. It was real, wrought iron, curved glass panels stained yellow by age, the wick still smoldering. I picked it up, heavy and warm in my hand, and for the first time I felt the weight of the old stories. How the bicyclist was said to be a man run down by a careless driver 60 years ago, how he pedaled that stretch forever searching for someone to flash the horn, a gesture of gratitude for not saving him but acknowledging his existence. They said if you didn't return the gesture, he'd chase you until dawn's first light, headlights chasing each other in a death spiral. I carried the lantern back to my car, heart thumping so loud I was afraid the bicyclist might hear it. I set it on the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove off without a backward glance. The lantern's glass glowed faintly under the dash. By the time I reached the gas station on the other side of town, the lantern was cold, dark as a coffin. I tried to ask the cashier about it, but she shook her head and wasn't surprised. "It finds its way back," she said, her voice a whisper, above the hum of the neon sign. "He only borrows kindness for a night." I paid for my coffee and left, feeling like a man carrying a promise he couldn't keep. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. I'd dream of pedaling into endless night roads. The lantern's light bobbing before me, the skeletal hand raised in silent thanks. I'd wake with sweat soaking my sheets, the lingering smell of rain and hot metal in my nostrils. Finally, one evening in late June, I drove back to FM 972 just after sunset. I brought the lantern with me, its glass panes as clear as the day. I found it. I parked past the curve, turned the engine off, and carried it into the ditch. My fingers trembled as I set it down and lifted my hand to the air. I tapped twice on the frame, blade tipped and cold. Tap, tap, I waited. The air rippled with expectancy, the twilight stretching like a held breath. I stood there until the last sliver of sun disappeared. Then I turned and walked back to my car. The lantern stayed in the ditch when I drove away. I never went back to FM 972 after that. People say the bicyclist still pedals that curve, lantern in hand, forever bound to. A moment when a life ended and a ghost began. They say if you venture there in the deep dark, he'll thank you. And if you don't, he'll come find you on some other road. Rusted guardrail ready to swallow you. Ribs ready to wrap around the steering wheel of your life. I don't know if that's true. But late at night, when the wind rattles the windows, and the road outside calls my name, I flash my horn twice just in case. I never meant to drive down FM 306 after dark, not again. But there I was, the dashboard clock blinking 11:17, the sky an inky nothing that swallowed the fields whole, and my headlights carving twin tunnels through the night. I'd been out past Lorena earlier, delivering that old oak rocking chair to Mrs. Calloway. She paid in cash. Said she'd been waiting months for someone brave enough to bring it back from that abandoned farmhouse off County Road 127. The road back to Waco was more direct, but something had drawn me instead to that shaky stretch of Farm to Market 306, the one locals whisper about but refuse to swear is real. They say the potholes look like skulls, cracked jaws and hollow eyes that watch you drive closer, but no one ever patches them, and every repair crew denies they exist. I tuned the radio as the dented grill cracked against the wind, looking for anything to cut through the sense of being watched. Static hissed until a solemn organ rose, a mournful chord that drew me in like a cart pulling me toward some hellish circus. Then the voice came, barely a whisper under the roar. Requiem aeternam dona eyes. Domini Haydn's Requiem, but slowed, warped, every bell toll stretched into eternity. I tapped the tuning dial. It skipped off into crackle and hiss, then snapped back to the same funeral dirge, as though the road itself was choosing to broadcast it. That's when I saw the first skull. A jagged gouge in the asphalt, its edges chalk white against the black, two eye sockets gouged deep like a winter moon's hollow stare, and a grin split in the curve of the pothole's lip. My heart stalled. I jerked the wheel through the high. Beams on full, but there were no shoulders, only cornstalks hunching beside me like mourners at a graveside vigil. The radio swelled, the organ groaning until I reached down and slammed the power button. Silence, except for the tires crunching. Gravel. Every instinct told me to turn around, to run away before the hollows in the road swallowed me, but the way back had been closed for months. Collapse, the county claimed. The detour signs had rotted down or blown away. I was stranded on this haunted ribbon of asphalt, the skulls ringing my headlights like a gallery of dead faces. So I pressed on, hoping that by some mercy I could outrun whatever foul business held this stretch in its grip. Each pothole I passed seemed fresh, as if the living earth had erupted into ghostly skulls overnight. One was the size of a toddler's skull, and I swear I saw a spiral of thin hair etched around its rim, like a fossilized shape pressed into tar. With every bump I felt a jolt in my spine, as though something inside those hollows was twitching, inching closer. I reached for the radio again, longing for any sound that wasn't the pounding of my heart, but only silence answered. My headlights flared on a sign, FM 306 North. Beneath it, someone had smeared with mud the word stop. No flashes of red or yellow, just crude scrawl and filth. I swallowed. My reflection blurred in the rearview mirror. Dark eyes rimmed in white, sweat beating at my hairline though the air was cool. Somewhere behind me, I thought I heard a thump against the trunk of my car, a dull metallic clang. My hand rose to the glove compartment where I kept a tire gauge and a bottle of water. Probably a branch fallen from the wind, I told myself. There had been wind. But then the radio sparked alive again, static folding into the same chord of requiem. I flipped. The switch gone again. I tapped it. Back came the organ, deeper now, as if the pipes were located beneath the pavement, miles of catacombs sending their echoes skyward. I turned the volume down, feeling the vibrations in my teeth. Ahead, another skull pothole, but this one was unlike the others. It seemed to sit proud, raised above the road like a bony ridge. I slowed until the grill almost touched it, peered down into the black gap, and saw something glinting. A pair of small round lenses, the gleam of glass. My breath. Hitched? Glasses? But whose? And why here? I hit the brakes too late. The front tire dipped in with a clunk, and the car shuddered. I cut the engine, the world dropping into near-silent velvet. The scent of damp earth and burnt oil hovered around me. Hesitantly, I unbuckled my seatbelt, stepped onto the cracked asphalt. The air was dead. The headlights stretched long arms of yellow across the fields, but beyond their reach was null. I crouched by the hole and peered in. The lenses were still there, perched on a nose-shaped shard of bone. I reached down, inches from that hollow maw, and my fingertips burned with cold. My chest tightened. I thought I heard something inside. Low rasp, like a gale coughing through a tomb dot. My fingers brushed the bone, or what I thought was bone. It was brittle, porous like volcanic rock. For a moment my skin crawled, and I drew back. The radio cut in then, a soft voice, almost tender, humming Haydn's Requiem melody without words. I spun toward my car. The passenger side window was down, though I'd left it up. A breeze carried leaves across the seat. I searched the fields, but they were empty. The hum rose into a chorus of phantom voices, and I felt the hair on my neck lift. I sprinted to the driver's door, yanked it open, and jumped in. My fingers found the ignition key, and I stomped it home. The engine roared, and the skeleton. Radio smashed through the dash, but through the static I heard my name, whispered like a benediction, "Michael." I froze. That wasn't my name. The whispered syllable repeated, and I realized it was too low, too guttural. It emerged from the road itself. The skulls I'd passed, their hollows had been mouths, and now they were speaking. I slammed the radio off and gunned the engine. The tires screeched, and I lifted off the brake and tore forward, swallowing potholes and gravel in a blur of motion. Emmy, the voice followed, rising into a cacophony of requiems as if some restless congregation of the dead were chanting in pursuit. The skull-shaped potholes blurred, but I could feel them, each bump a hammer blow to my skull. My vision flickered between the wreck of my headlights and the wheel. I forced myself to breathe evenly. Though my lungs burned, Lorena's lights appeared like a mirage-warm, distant, promising refuge. I floored it, the tarmac bending under the thunder of my wheels. And then, as if someone yanked the rug from beneath me, the road went flat. The skulls ended. The fields parted, and the sweet glow of street lamps washed over me. The radio crackled back to life, not Haydn, but classic rock, the familiar strains of a guitar solo slicing through the night. I blinked, pressed my palm to the steering wheel, heart pounding like the pistons beneath me. I didn't stop until I reached the first gas station, where the attendant stared at me like I'd sprouted horns. He offered a coffee, but I just shook my head and asked the time. 11:45. 28 minutes since I'd left that wretched road. I fumbled for my wallet, paid, and drove off without another glance. The next morning, I called the county highway department. I asked about FM 306 repair schedules, about skull-shaped potholes. They laughed. No such road in their system. A driver had reported a damaged section west of Lorena, but that was years ago, they said, and the county crews fixed it quickly. I pressed for details. When, what repair crew, what time. Silence. Then the voice on the line flat, "Are you feeling all right, sir?" I hung up. I looked back at FM 306 on the map that evening. A straight, unbroken line, no markings, no detours. No potholes at all. But I know what I saw. I know what spoke my name over the organ echo of Haydn's Requiem. They patched the road, I suppose, but not the bones beneath it. And if you drive that way past Lorena, at night, when the fields hold their breath, listen close. You might just hear the hum of a choir that never learned to rest in peace. And when you hit those skull-shaped holes, if they're still there, reach down and touch the bone. Someone else's fingertips might be waiting for you. The engine's hum fell away beneath the hush of live oaks and mesquite, and the narrow ribbon of asphalt ahead swallowed the headlights, plunging the world into a tunnel of obsidian night. I eased the Crown Victoria's speed down to 20 miles an hour, have to spare my worn tires in half because a warning light somewhere in the back of my head whispered that Bandera County at 2 in the morning was no place for hurry. Fog curled in veils along the roadside, clinging to cactus and low shrubs, and the moon, a sickle sliver tucked beneath ragged clouds, offered almost no light. The only certainty was the click of my blinkers and the thump of my pulse against the steering wheel. Just past a rise so gentle I barely felt it. I saw them 2 points of glare, bright and soulless. They floated in the middle of the lane as if headlights had materialized on wings. My heart slammed. I thought for a second it must be a pickup truck stalled there, but no red taillights glimmered beyond, and the beams spread wide as though aimed directly at me. I braked instinctively, the tires singing against the pavement. The lights swooped toward the grill with the velocity of a striking animal, then skidded to a halt so close I could feel the heat of their beams through the metal. I sat frozen, door handle in hand, face streaked by condensation on the windshield, staring at nothing more than empty air beyond those headlights. After a long second, I scooped up the flashlight from the passenger seat. My fingers trembled against the smooth metal. When I opened the door, the wind that rushed in was sharp and cold, smelling of damp earth and something fouled like rot. The headlights flared their full intensity, searing my vision, but when I aimed the beam into the center of the road, there was nothing. The asphalt lay bare beneath drifting fog, and only the skeletal outlines of the trees responded, their branches thrashing as if in silent agony. I swept the flashlight back and forth, my breath a ragged hiss in my ears. No reflection off chrome or glass, no shape between the beams, only emptiness. My rational mind fought to piece it together. A prank? Some kid with a generator car out here doing dares? But no way anyone could keep those lights so steady, so precise, and then vanish without a trace. My pulse pounded in my temples as I knelt to inspect the grill. Everything was intact, no impact marks, no rubber residue, nothing but the faint echo of those lights still humming in my skull. I straightened, and that's when the radio crackled. Not a station tuning in, but static that swelled into a low moan, like voices carried on the wind. I clicked the dial. The static vanished immediately, but in its place was my own breathing. Whoever or whatever had wielded those lights wasn't finished. I closed the door and slipped back behind the wheel. The engine sputtered and then caught, shuddering like a living thing. As I puttered forward, the headlights reappeared, this time behind me, following at a distance of maybe 10 yards. I dared a glance in the rearview mirror and saw nothing but darkness broken by 2 circles of brightness hovering above the road. I stomped the accelerator. The Crown Vic lunged into motion, but the phantom lights came with me, matching my speed. Higher gear, same result. I felt a chill of fear that had nothing to do with the cool air, and I realized I wasn't driving down FM 466 anymore. I was hurtling through a corridor of some other realm that had reached out and seized me. The road curved around a limestone outcrop, and I jerked the wheel, tires groaning, headlights aimed into the cabbage palms that crowded the shoulder. I prayed there would be a turnout, a ranch gate, anything to slip off. In the mirror, the ghost lights paused at the bend, their beams twitching as though confused, then erupted into a dazzling zoom that swallowed the forest in daylight. My heart lodged in my throat. The sudden brightness felt like a blow. I covered my eyes, but the shaft of light pierced the windshield above my visor. A thunderclap of sound rattled the car metal on metal, and I gripped the wheel as the Crown Vic skidded off the asphalt, spraying gravel against the rocky slope. When the car finally ground to a halt, I dared to open my eyes. The phantom lights were gone. In the gloom, the trees loomed, leaning inward. The only movement was the fog drifting across empty pavement. My tires had gouged a rut in the shoulder, but beyond that, no sign of the confrontation I'd just endured. I unbuckled and swung my legs out, boots crunching on stone. A soft rustle told me something moved in the thicket, something small. I flicked the flashlight off the console and clicked it on. In the beam, the road ahead was clear, but at the edge of the trees, shapes crouched, eyes shining faintly red, like coals sunk in hollow sockets. They retreated the instant I shone the light directly, dissolving into shadows. I leaned forward, voice trembling as I whispered, "What are you?" No answer but the drip of condensation from leaves. I stood taller, raising the flashlight above my head, its circle widening to reveal a black sedan parked in my place on the asphalt. It was pristine, untarnished by gravel or dirt, and looked as if it had just rolled off a showroom floor. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. My rational mind insisted this must be the source of the lights, but when I took a step, my boot gashed the air. The sedan's tires didn't make a crease in the pavement. It was unreal, suspended. On a horizon between reality and something else, I moved closer. My footsteps sounded muffled, like walking through water. The closer I got, the more my flashlight seemed to dim, as though the vehicle drank the light. I swiped my hand across the hood. It passed right through. I recoiled with a grunt. No solidity. Panic wrapped around my ribs. I should have run, should have gotten back in my car, sped away, but something held me, curiosity, disbelief, the sick thrill of standing face to face with impossibility. Then, the sedan's headlights ignited behind the windshield. Full beams blazed for a heartbeat, and I reeled back, the glare peeling my vision. And then the lights charged forward, out through the glass, through the air, toward me. I dropped to the ground, scrambling backward, dirt slicing my palms. The lights passed overhead, humming like a swarm of hornets, unerringly accurate. My ears rang as they flew past, and I rolled to my feet, sprinting toward my Crown Vic, adrenaline flooding every muscle. The lights folded back, circling me, trapping me in a net of brilliance that stung my eyes. I covered my face, stumbled. Into the sight inside as it swooped down again. But this time, I grabbed the handle of the rear door. The door swung open into nothing, yawning like an empty mouth. I hesitated, mind screaming to flee. But the lights closed in. My foot found purchase in the doorframe, and I pulled free, tumbling into an empty void. For a breathless moment I fell. Through nothing, suspended between realities, and the cold seeped into my bones. Then I hit pavement with a thud, wind knocked out of me. I rolled onto my back and fought for air, chest heaving. Above me, the fog parted, and I saw two headlights looming at the bend, flickering like dying stars. They held there, unmoving, and then blinked off. I lay there long after the darkness returned, waiting for my heart to still. Behind me, the Crown Vic sat alone on the shoulder, its door half open, engine ticking as metal cooled. I crawled back toward it, half expecting the sedan to appear again, but nothing stirred. When I finally got inside, I locked the doors with trembling fingers, and the interior light cast a sickly glow on the empty passenger seat. I fumbled the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared and I floored the gas, tires clawing. Rode as I peeled back onto FM 466, the ditch and stones flying past. For miles I didn't look back. My eyes burned from headlights that weren't mine, and I kept the visor down, breathing through my mouth. When at last I reached a stretch of road where the oaks receded into scrub, I allowed myself to glance in the mirror. No lights, no phantom. Sedan, only the dark curve of the road disappearing under distant stars. But deep in my chest, I still felt their weight, two unblinking eyes tracing my spine. And in the relentless quiet beyond the windscreen, I understood that some roads in Bandera County weren't meant to be traveled after nightfall, because the darkness there wasn't empty. It watched, it waited, and when it chose to strike, it came without warning or mercy. I remember the first time I heard about the Twisted Sister. It was late summer, the air still warm from the days yet turning crisp underneath the pines. I just rented the old Ford station wagon from JC at the service station in Leakey. Swore it'd get me anywhere when I decided to take the long way down towards Konkan, skirting the Frio River. There's nothing remarkable about that stretch at first. 2 lanes of asphalt, a roadside pull-off lined in broken copper-tone wildflowers. The dense trees pressing so close you can almost feel them breathing. But around milepost 22 give or take you start to notice the silence. I rolled down the window, expecting the usual hum of cicadas or the rustle of leaves, but there was just this heavy stillness, like you'd driven into a void. My engine felt smooth until it didn't. One moment I was gliding past a battered sign warning of steep grades, and the next, the station wagon shuddered. The gauges dipped, the tachometer wobbling like a split-second seizure, and then the rattling gave way to dead silence under the hood. My heart jumped. I flicked the ignition, turned the key, again nothing. No sputter, no cough, no whining starter. Motor. Just the faint click of the solenoid, a quick, cold joke. I coasted to the shoulder, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Peering into the trees, my flashlight revealed nothing but trunks and underbrush. The beam pierced only a few feet before dissolving into darkness. I tried my phone, no signal. Of course, this was the back road where maps go to die. That's when I saw them. 2 eyes, low in the weeds at the very edge of the shoulder. Cold pinpricks of pale blue light, each no larger than a marble. They glowed, unswerving, intense. I froze, hand on the flashlight. The eyes didn't blink, they just stared. They were too far apart to be human, too small. A fox? A raccoon? Didn't seem right. The eyes were unnaturally still, reflecting. Back the beam like perfect lenses. Hello? I called, voice rough. No answer, but the echo of my own voice bouncing off invisible walls. My knees jarred against the car door as I climbed out, breathing shallow. I clicked the flashlight off, then back on eyes gone. Just wet leaves and rotted pine needles. I exhaled, tension sliding off my shoulders in a nervous laugh. Some nocturnal critter, nothing more. I knelt, shining the beam again, but still only the earth. I stood, dusting gravel from my jeans, and leaned into the engine bay. No leaks, no loose wires, nothing obvious. The hood rattled in my hands. I went back inside and closed the hood with a bang that echoed unnaturally loud. If I could push the car to solid ground, I'd be okay. Hell, I could walk the rest of the way. It wasn't so far. I slapped the car into gear and tried to push. It budged an inch, then stalled again. The gauge lights flickered once, mournfully. My skin crawled. I stepped back, chest tight. Then I heard it, the softest rumble. Like distant metal grinding, rising in a crescendo I felt more than heard. My flashlight trembled in my fist. The trees across the road began to sway, though there was no breeze. Leaves whipped against the windshield. The headlights flickered, and through the flicker I saw movement. Dozens of little pinpoints, like stars, drifting between the trunks on both sides of the road. They bobbed in and out of view, some at trunk height, others low to the ground. Eyes. I climbed back in and locked the doors, heart hammering. That grinding sound rose into a roaring chorus. The lights around the trees grew brighter, closer. Eyes. hovered at the windshield, pressing against the glass until I could feel the pressure, cold and slick like wet stones. I fumbled for the key, heart pounding in my throat, then the engine caught. The roar silenced instantly, engine pulsing smoothly. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas. The station wagon jerked forward, tires spinning on the gravel. The eyes at the windows vanished in an instant, as though they'd never been. I shot down the road, headlights slicing through the emptiness until I reached black asphalt again. I stopped at the next house. I saw an old clapboard set far back, with a single lamp burning on the porch. An old man in denim overalls answered my pounding at the door. He looked at me with tired eyes, drawn tight like leather. I told him about the car, the eyes, the whole twisted night. He nodded once as though he already knew. Twisted Sister's been doing that ever since the bus, he said. His voice was a whisper. Years back, they found the school bus way down the ravine. Kids and driver gone, but the wreck was there, coach hanging off the edge. They searched for days, never a body. Folks said they saw lights in the woods, thought. They heard children's laughter. Then cars started stalling. Hunters, tourists, anyone who got too close, they lost power, their lights died. And those eyes? I tried to ask more, but he turned and walked away, leaving me on the porch, small lamp flickering in the dark. I heard him mutter as he climbed the steps, a hymn half sung. I got a jump on the rest of the drive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something followed me. My headlights played tricks, branches snapping like bones, shadows shifting at the corner of my vision. Whenever I glanced in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see reflective eyes riding the tail. But there was only black road and the yellow. Line vanishing into my taillights back and leaky, I tried starting the car the next morning. It fired just fine. Mechanics said there was nothing wrong, spark plugs good, battery fresh, alternator solid. Maybe guzzled some bad gas, he suggested, though I'd filled up in town. I paid him and left, but I've never driven RM337 after dark since. I can still feel those eyes at the glass, still hear the hum of engines cutting out. Sometimes, at night, when the wind rustles the curtains just right, I swear I see pale pinpricks moving in the shadows outside my window. Always watching. And every now and then, I wonder what happened to that bus, to those children. I wonder whose eyes I saw, whose eyes I'm seeing now. Because the school bus never leaves the ravine, but the children, they ride the Twisted Sister every night. And they're always looking for a new driver.